is divided into two broad factions, created soon after the death of Prophet Muhammad in 632 AD. Throughout the centuries, their differences have led to bloodshed.
So what is it about, actually?
Well, the split can be traced back to the question of who will inherit the leadership of the Ummah after the Prophet Muhammad wafat. So from there it emerged two camps. People who believe that Abu Bakar was the rightful caliph, and those who believe that Ali, because of his connections with the Muhammad's family, that he should be the rightful caliph. So that was where it all began. After that, the situation after the Prophet's passing was very intense, right? There were wars, even the battle, the infamous battle of the camel, where even Aisyah took arms and led the war, right? So it was a very unstable and precarious time, because for the longest time they had a prophet who communicated God's message. After he passed away, the question was, well, how are we going to continue that leadership? How are we going to continue that vision, the Muslim vision, in this world without a leader? Right? So from there, you had these two camps emerge. The camp of Ali, which eventually became the Syiah, as we know today. And then those who believe that the succession of the leadership was fair. Abu Bakar, Omar, Osman, Ali, there's no need to question that. We accept that. And those people, that tradition eventually became the Sunni tradition that we know today lah.
Tak kira Sunni dengan Syiah sepakat bahawa Sayyidina Ali adalah khalifah. Cuma Syiah meletakkan khalifah yang pertama. Sunni meletakkan khalifah Ali juga. Tapi giliran yang keempat setelah khalifah Abu Bakar, Omar dan Osman. Okey. Kita tanya Syiah, kenapa mengatakan Sayyidina Ali adalah khalifah yang pertama? Syiah akan mengatakan bahawa Nabi telah bersabda, dan sabda tersebut terdapat di dalam riwayat-riwayat, di dalam hadis-hadis yang mana Syiah bawa sebagai dalil.
So if the division is merely political, the fight for succession, why the incredibly deep hatred between the two? The answer lies in the Battle of Karbala, 50 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Here at the Battle of Karbala, his own grandson, his own flesh and blood, was brutally decapitated, his head lopped off, as his small army was decimated by a huge caliphate army.
Kita lihatlah sejarah, adakah satu sejarah yang berlaku di mana peperangan berlaku 30,000 tentera berhadapan dengan 72 orang. Satu peperangan yang tak boleh digambarkan sama sekali. Kan? Yang akhir sekali berkesudahan dengan pembantaian cucu cicit Nabi Muhammad SAW. Sekitar lebih 20 orang cucu cicit Nabi dibantai dalam satu hari. Jadi kita bayangkan anak cucu kita dibantai di satu tempat 30 orang sekaligus. Kemudian kita nak cerita ini Sunni, ini Syiah. Ini satu benda yang sama sekali tak dapat diterima. Kan? Umat manusia tidak dapat menerima perkara ini dijadikan satu pertikaian mazhab. Kerana ini bukan cerita mazhab, ini cerita kemanusiaan. Tapi apa yang berlaku ke atas cucu Nabi sesudah Nabi wafat pada tahun 11 Hijrah, pada tahun 61 Hijrah, 50 tahun sesudah Nabi wafat, bagaimana cucu Nabi dikeroyok, dipenggal kepala, kan? Dan cucu cicit Nabi yang lain, termasuk yang kecil yang dirobek telinganya, ditarik untuk semata-mata untuk diambil anting-anting. Ini boleh lihat dalam peristiwa. Saya tidak mau sentuh banyak perkara ini, nanti ada sebuah orang cuba untuk contohnya, kerana banyak tuduhan-tuduhan saya lihat di sekitar tajuk inilah.
The all-defining battles of Karbala, when a huge army of Caliphate defeated in a brutal fashion a small numbers of Imam Hussein's forces, has been repeated over and over again in one form or another over 1,000 years. The brutalities of the Caliphate army spelled a death knell for the unities of Islam and Muslim and ensured divisions of the religion into two warring sects, Sunni and Shia. The conflict is still ongoing all over the world.
There is a plea by Muhammad Kamil Zuhairi Abdul Aziz, the chairperson of the Syiah Center in Malaysia, Hausa al-Ridha, that the events of Karbala should not be a cause for division, but for unity of all Muslims regardless of mazhab.
Minta tolong supaya jangan dilibatkan isu sunnah Syiah di dalam perkara ni. Jadi umat Islam kena kembali kepada Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, kembali kepada al-Quran tanpa mengira sentimen mazhab.
Abang tahu tak apa tu Syiah dan apa itu Sunni?
Syiah ni yang saya tahu dia dia taksub pada Nabi Ali, ya Saidina Ali. Itulah yang saya tahu.
Sunni pula bagaimana?
Sunni tak tahu lah Sunni. Syiah ni pada saya macam dia terlalu taksub lah dengan Saidina Ali. Rasa macam yelah, kita kan Nabi Muhammad yang terakhir kan, patut dia kena ikut Nabi Muhammad lah. Tapi terlalu taksub, saya rasa macam sesat lah. Itulah.
Dan apa yang abang rasa sepatutnya Jabatan Agama kita buat ni pada golongan Syiah yang mengamalkan Syiah di Malaysia ni sendiri?
Pandangan saya rasa dia kena bantras lah. Mungkin kena ambil tindakan kat dia ke, bahawa ajaran tu tak betul.
What Syiah and what Sunni? Don't know? Well, don't feel too bad about it. You and I aren't the only ones. We took our camera to Friday prayer and stopped some folks to ask what they know about Sunni and Syiah. You'll be surprised at the responses.
Abang tahu tak apa itu Syiah dan apa itu Sunni?
Syiah dengan Sunni tu tak berapa tahu lah, tapi tahu dia macam pemahaman lah.
Pemahaman lah. Pemahaman dia macam mana?
Secara detail lagi tak berapa tahu sangat.
Ya. Okey, macam yang kita tahu basic lah. Pemahaman antara dia dengan Islam kita ni, Islam biasa kita agama ni, dengan dia punya pemahaman. Agak apa perbezaan dia?
Tu tak tahu sangat. Sebab tak berapa tahu sangat lah ni. Macam dengar sikit-sikit.
Yang last, abang rasa Syiah ni dia macam ni? Dia sesat ataupun tidak?
Rasa macam tak tahu. Tak berani nak cakap.
Okay, terima kasih.
Okay.
Is this over time the Shia tradition developed practices that the Sunnis believe is alien and foreign. So self-flagellation during the Ashura, right? The images after the fall of Saddam Hussein, you saw this migration of pilgrims. Every time during Ashura, they would go to Karbala and they would engage in the practice of self-flagellation, which is completely foreign to Sunni practices, right? And then there's also the controversial issue of mut'ah, which is temporary marriages. So Sunnis tend to point to these to show that, look, this is sesat, you know. But again, the question here is we cannot let these small things obscure us from the real issue, which is the question of leadership of the.
Dan Syiah, kedua-duanya adalah bahagian daripada masyarakat Islam lah. Jadi ada yang bermazhab Sunni, ada yang bermazhab Syiah. Kan? Jadi sebenarnya perkara Sunni dan Syiah ni, sebelum kita pergi lebih jauh lah, membuat penelitian tentang perbezaan di antara kedua-duanya, pertama sekali kita nak katakan bahawa kedua-duanya adalah dari satu keluarga. Jadi sebelum ianya berbeza, ianya adalah maksudnya mempunyai persamaan. Itu pertama yang pada pandangan saya kita perlu tekankan. Jadi sekarang ni ramai orang menimbulkan contohnya
isu sehingga menjadi perdebatan. Tak kira lah sama ada dalam bentuk lisan ataupun dalam bentuk penulisan, atau di dalam alam cyber. Jadi dah seolah-olah macam satu benda yang kecoh pula, Sunni Syiah. Yang ditimbulkan ialah perbezaan. Sehingga lupa yang di situ ada persamaan. Sebelum berbeza, ianya bersama. Bersama di dalam mempunyai Tuhan yang Maha Esa, iaitu Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. Sunni pun bertuhankan Allah yang Maha Suci. Subhanallah, Maha Suci Allah. Syiah pun sama juga, bertuhankan Allah yang Maha Suci. Tak adalah kata kita temu ramah interview Sunni, dia kata dia mempunyai Tuhan yang berbeza daripada Syiah. Kita temu ramah Syiah, ia akan mengatakan dia mempunyai Tuhan yang berbeza daripada Sunni. Tak ada. Tetapi yang ada ialah tudingan-tudingan. Mungkin kita jumpa sebahagian orang yang akan mengatakan bahawa Syiah mempunyai kepercayaan sedemikian tentang ketuhanan. Tetapi kalau kita pergi cari seorang yang pakar, yang ahli di dalam pegangan Syiah, i'tiqadat Syiah, sesuatu yang berbeza daripada tudingan yang kita dengar. Baru-baru ni, kecoh. Sehingga di dalam akhbar keluar buletin-buletin yang khas, maksudnya sehingga 4-5 muka surat mengatakan Syiah percaya bahawa Tuhan itu jahil. Kita pergi carilah Syiah yang bukan alim ulama lah. Satu Syiah yang bukan alim ulama, Syiah yang biasa, yang bukan mempunyai pendidikan agama pun, dia akan merasa pelik. Bagaimana kita mengatakan Tuhan itu jahil, sedangkan Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala Tuhan yang maha sempurna. Sifat kejahilan itu bertentangan dengan sifat kesempurnaan. Saya kata ini adalah tuduhan yang tak masuk akal. Bukan Islam pun tidak akan mengatakan bahawa Tuhan itu, na'udzubillah, jahil. Jadi itu contoh perbezaan. Banyak lagi perbezaan yang ditimbulkan yang akhir sekali ternyata perkara itu hanya berbentuk fitnah yang tidak mempunyai asas sama sekali. Jadi dari rumpun yang sama, dari keluarga yang sama, pertama sekali berpegang kepada kalimat tauhid, la ilaha illallah. Tiada ilah, Tuhan yang layak disembah. La ilah, kan? Illallah, kecuali Allah yang maha suci, yang maha sempurna. Tak kira Sunni, tak kira Syiah. Jadi di mana yang berbeza dari segi ketuhanan? Adalah perbezaan yang berbentuk juz'i, yang berbentuk, orang kata, contohnya bila nak berbahas di dalam ilmu kalam.
Dia macam-macam dalam fikiran dia. Dia kata macam kalau Syiah tu, kalau dia mengucap kalimat syahadah tu, dia masukkan nama Saidina Ali. Kalau orang Syiah tu solat, dia kata dia ada letak batu kat depan. So this kind of perception dan has never been corrected.
Padahal itu bukan batu, itu tanah. Jadi kalau diperhalusi hukum hakam fiqh atau di dalam ahli sunnah pun, Imam Syafi'i pun mempunyai kenyataan yang menyatakan afdal sujud di atas bumi. Boleh rujuk kitab-kitab Imam Syafi'i di dalam kitab ahli sunnah sendiri. Jadi apa yang dilakukan oleh orang Syiah, sujud di atas tanah, dengan apa yang ada pada mazhab Imam Syafi'i, afdalnya sujud di atas bumi adalah sesuatu yang sama, yang tidak bercanggah. Cuma masalahnya, kita dah di sini biasa sujud dalam masjid dengan kapet, dengan permaidani. Bila kita tengok orang sujud bawa tanah, sujud di atas tanah, jadi sudah menjadi benda yang menjadi bahan tuhmahan. Sedangkan kalau dirujuk kitab-kitab fiqh di dalam mazhab Syafi'i sendiri pun ada persamaan dengan Syiah. Sembah berhala. Kami menyembah Allah SWT yang Maha Esa. Jadi mustahil kami menyembah batu. Kami mempunyai akidah tauhid, berpegang pada keesaan Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. Jadi apa yang kami lakukan ialah sujud di atas tanah seperti yang ada di dalam mazhab Imam Jaffer Sadiq, cicit Nabi, yang menjadi guru kepada imam-imam mazhab yang lain, yang mempunyai pengiktirafan kata-kata daripada imam-imam mazhab yang lain. Tanah Karbala, yakni tanah tempat makamnya Sayyidina Husain, kan? Tetapi apakah tanah tersebut daripada Karbala menjadi penyebab kepada kesyirikan? Kita tanya orang tersebut, kenapa dikatakan sebagai syirik? Kenapa tanah Gombak tidak syirik contohnya? Kalau tanah dari tempat lain tidak syirik. Jadi itu terpulang kepada akidah orang tersebut. Kenapa kita bila sembahyang kita sujud di atas gambar masjid tidak syirik? Kerana kita tidak ada etikat tentang ketuhanan apa yang berada di hadapan kita itu. Kita sujud di atasnya, bukan sujud kepadanya. Berbeza. Imam Syafi'i pun mengatakan afdal sujud di atas bumi, bukan kita sujud kepada bumi. Kerana orang Syiah bukan sembah tanah, bukan sembah batu, tetapi sujud meletakkan tempat yang paling mulia di atas tempat yang seolah-olah bagi umat manusia secebis tanah yang tidak ada nilai. Maka simbolik berhadapan dengan Allah yang Maha Agung, kita meletakkan kepala kita, anggota badan yang paling mulia, sebagai kemuncak perhambaan, kemuncak penyembahan kita kepada Allah SWT. Sejak akhir-akhir ini pun kerap kita dengar kadang-kadang menyatakan tentang kenabian, sehingga ada yang menuduh Syiah mengatakan bahawa sepatutnya wahyu turun kepada Sayyidina Ali, tetapi silap turun kepada Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Jadi ini samalah seperti perkara yang kita sebutkan tadi. Ini adalah satu fitnah lah, satu tohmahan. So, sekiranya ada yang mempunyai akidah yang sebegini, yang mengatakan sepatutnya wahyu turun kepada, tak kira lah Sayyidina Ali ataupun orang lain sesudah Nabi Muhammad, jadi orang ini bukanlah orang Islam. Jadi tidak tergolong daripada golongan muslimin. Jadi kami Syiah adalah sebahagian daripada umat Islam. Jadi kami tidak mempunyai akidah yang sedemikian. Nabi yang terakhir ialah Nabi Muhammad SAW, seperti yang difirmankan oleh Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala, khataman nabiyyin, kan? Bahawa khatam, penutup segala nabi-nabi adalah Nabi Muhammad di dalam Al-Quran. Jadi kalau ada satu orang yang mengaku Islam tapi bercanggah dengan firman Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala, di mana keislamannya itu? Tak kira lah Sunni ke Syiah ke apa saja mazhab, kalau dikatakan dalam Islam tidak bercanggah dengan Al-Quran. Jadi ini adalah satu fitnah semata-mata. Kerana Sayyidina Ali bagi kami adalah khalifah, adalah penggantinya Rasulullah, adalah seorang imam, adalah seorang pemimpin setelah Nabi Muhammad SAW wafat. Jadi bukanlah seorang nabi.
So why are we still very wary of Syiah Islam here in Malaysia?
I think it's partly because it has become completely sidelined, overshadowed in the sort of the Malaysian, conception of identity, right? Like, it's sort of like why we're so upset about Jews, but there are no Jews around, or maybe they were at one point, they were expelled. I don't know, right? But because the less we know, the more we react out of fear and ignorance, right? And I think that's the thing with Shia. A similar kind of way of looking at it, you can apply it to the Shia case as well, right? We're very ill-informed about Shia Muslim. Most of us don't know any Shias. Most of us find the practices weird, right? So we react out of suspicion, and we take what we hear more seriously than anything that we've really encountered, right? When the right thing to do would be to pause and reflect. The question of Malay politics, right? Malay politics have always been premised on conformity, right? So we have to conform, and whether it's through the feudal institutions, whether it's through racial politics, whether it's through religion, in this case, conformity is very, very important. And so anything that's different, we demonize them, and we say that, you know, they have to be corrected into the kind of mainstream way of thinking, right? Which is, they call it sometimes it's called Islam, but most of the time it's just really Malay supremacy using Islam as a way to get people to move on.
Islam tu terbagi pada dua golongan. First, Sunni dengan Syiah. Sunni ni dia berdasarkan daripada apa yang dikeluarkan oleh ijma' sahabat. Dan Syiah ni pula dia adalah satu kelompok Islam yang memperjuangkan nasib Sayyidina Ali.
Bagi abang, pada pendapat abang lah, Syiah tidak sesat. Mereka hanya pengikut daripada kelompok Islam yang menyesal, yang marah dengan tindakan sekelompok Islam yang lain, yang tidak menuntut bela tentang kematian Sayyidina Ali ni. Firstly lah, Islam tu hanya satu. Islam tak berpecah. Islam tak ada Sunni, tak ada Syiah. So apa yang kita perlu fahamkan kepada semua umat manusia, Islam tu hanya satu. Di bawah satu kepimpinan. Okey. Dan Syiah sebenarnya cuma salah fahaman mengenai apa yang telah berlaku. Sekiranya Jabatan Agama Islam dapat kembali membentuk masyarakat ni, saya rasa tak ada jadi masalah untuk menjadi satu masyarakat yang bersatu kembali.
Itulah, dia benda ni dah lama benda ni kan. So agak susah sikit. Saya rasa macam kalau boleh tu bagi kesedaran lah, banyak bagi ceramah pasal benda ni semua kan. So diorang boleh sedar lah yang diorang, buatan diorang tu memang salah lah, tak betul lah.
Abang ada pernah jumpa ke dengan orang ataupun?
Saya tak pernah jumpa, tapi dalam YouTube tu saya pernah tengok banyak lah. Kalau macam diorang buat upacara diorang tu macam nampak macam tak betul sangat lah kan. Dia tak kena lah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على نبي الأمي العربي القرشي الهاشمي المدني الأبتهي الطهامي السيد البهي والسراج المضيء والكوكب الدري صاحب الوقار والسكينة المدفون بأرض المدينة العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد حبيب إله العالمين وخاتم النبيين وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين ورحمة للعالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الميامين المظلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد صل على محمد Tonight we have gathered to mark our loss of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And the subject of our discussion is the concept of imamat in Islam. This will be our subject tomorrow night as well. Before I get into the subject itself, I would like to mention that when discussing this, in addition to my Shia brothers and sisters, I have two other groups in mind as my audience. One group that I wish to address as well in this subject are those non-Shia or Sunni Muslim brothers and sisters who hold the opinion that imamat is a concept that is foreign to Islam, that imamat is a concept that the Shias introduced, and that only they believe in this concept. We wish to dispel that doubt tonight, inshallah. The other group that I wish to address as well are those revert Muslims that I come across time and again, who after having embraced Islam, when they begin studying the difference between the Shia and the Sunni Muslims, particularly in theology and history, they are so overwhelmed by the differences, and at some point they are fed up and they say, I am a Muslim, I am neither a Shia nor a Sunni. I believe in the Quran, I believe in the Rasul, the rest is just history. This is another group as well that we wish to address. I wish to clarify as well that whilst discussing this subject, because we must refer to history, we will be mentioning personalities that are well known to the Muslims. In no way is the intention of these discussions intended to be polemic or to offend anyone. They are, in a sense, if you like, intra-faith dialogue. And we hope that these are expressed actually with a lot of sincerity. We wish to bring about an understanding and share our perspective. And of course, we welcome others to speak from their perspectives as well, so that inshallah, we may use the personality of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ali Muhammad. To bring us closer to each other. I should also mention that because the subject itself requires extensive treatment and it may be difficult to complete the subject in 2 nights, I may go over by 5 or 10 minutes. This is a reputation I have as well, and I do not wish to spoil my reputation. Ahsant. And because of the audience that I just mentioned, I will not be discussing imamat from a Shia theology perspective. I will be discussing it from actually a non-Shia perspective, but inshallah it is relevant to all of us as well. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So without any delay then, we get into the subject right away. First and foremost, we define what we mean by an imam. When we say imam, we do not mean imam in a limited sense. In Islam, the person who leads you in prayer is also called imam of Salatul Jama'ah. But he is imam only for the duration of the prayer. We also do not mean imam in the sense that Muslims use for a scholar who is an expert in a particular field. The Shias have used this in a very limited sense, as for example when they say Imam Khomeini, to mean an individual who was known for his political and religious leadership, and in that sense he is a leader. In the Sunni world, this term is very, very common. Imam Ghazali, for example, to refer to someone who is an expert in ethics and morals. Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim as experts in hadith. Or the 4 schools of fiqh, Imam Shafi, Imam Maliki, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Abu Hanifa, in that sense, as an expert in a particular science or field. We do not mean imam in that sense. When we talk of imam here for tonight and tomorrow, we mean Imam in the sense of the individual who succeeds the Prophet of Islam, who sits in his place as the guardian of the Islamic legislation or Sharia, with the intention of preserving the message of Islam and the Quran, and guiding the Muslims in their worldly as well as their religious affair. And when such an individual is established as an Imam, then it becomes obligatory on the Muslims to pay allegiance to such a man, to do his bay'ah, and to obey him and to follow him. So we mean Imam in that sense. When you understand the definition of an Imam in that sense, then the next thing that we need to appreciate is that having an Imam is considered to be wajib, obligatory by all Muslims, Shia and Sunni. So this is the first myth we wish to dispel. The hadith that says, Man mata walam ya'rif imama zamanihi mata mitat al-jahiliya. One who dies without knowing the Imam of his time dies the death of Jahiliyyah, is not a Shia hadith only. It is acknowledged as an authentic hadith by the Shia and the Sunni. Keep in mind that when this hadith uses the word Jahiliyyah, even though it comes from Jahala, which means ignorance, it refers to Ayyam al-Jahiliyyah, which is the days before Islam, the days of ignorance, which was the days of kufr. So one who dies without knowing the Imam of his time, dies the death of Jahiliyyah, does not mean dies the death of one who is ignorant. No, it means he dies the death of one who is an infidel, who is the death of kufr. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who is one of the Imams of the 4 schools of fiqh, and held in high regard, he reports a hadith in his Musnad, which is even stronger than this hadith. He does not say one who dies without knowing the Imam of his time. He says, Man mata bi ghayri imamin mata mitat al-jahiliyyah. One who dies without an Imam dies the death of ignorance. Not one who does not know his Imam, one who does not have an Imam. Having an Imam is so important in Islam that Muslim scholars, not from the Shias, believe that this chain of Imamah continued until the 3rd of March 1924. They say after the Prophet there were 4 caliphs, the Khulafa al-Rashidun. After them the Banu Umayyah ruled. After them the Banu Abbas. After them the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire disbanded after the First World War, when Kemal Atatürk in Turkey, because the Ottomans were the Turks, he disbanded and removed the concept of Khilafat and Imamat on the 3rd of March 1924. Thereafter, Muslims have continued calling for the need to revive the institution of Khilafat and Imamat. You can search on the internet. Those of you who are from India and Pakistan, you know about the Khilafat movement. Search Khilafat movement. You will see the attempts that have been made. There are websites dedicated to this. Look at khalifa.com, for example, that is calling for the restoration of Khilafat. There are websites that have counters. How many days Muslims have continued living without an Imam and a Khalifa, and they say for these many days Muslims are committing a sin because they have not pledged allegiance to anyone. And all these who die without an Imam are answerable before Allah. I wish to emphasize this point once more, because I know there are groups who believe, perhaps out of ignorance, that Imamat is a Shia concept. The Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab had a son called Abdullah, well known in history, Abdullah ibn Umar. He was not fond of Imam Ali, and he refused to pledge allegiance to Imam Ali as well. When the Umayyads came to rule, and one of their caliphs after Yazid, shortly after him, was Marwan, when Marwan died and his son Abdul Malik became the caliph, and Abdullah ibn Umar found out that he has been appointed as the caliph, he said, I must pledge allegiance right now to the caliph, so that if I die tonight, I do not die without an imam. And he at the time was in Iraq, where the governor of Abdul Malik was Hajjaj. Many of you may have heard of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. Hajjaj was a tyrant. His favorite pastime was to kill the Shia. When he was bored, he used to say, I feel like killing a Shia of Ali today. He is the man who killed Kumail ibn Ziyad, the companion of Imam Ali, from whom we recite Dua Kumail. He is the man who killed Qambar. He is the man who killed Sa'id ibn Jubair. He killed thousands and thousands of Sadat and Shias. He was the governor of Abdul Malik. So Abdullah ibn Umar said, I must go and give my allegiance to Hajjaj as the governor of the caliph, so that I do not die without an imam. Now listen to this. This is from the books of history, not from our history. By the way, before I continue, a very important point I wish to make here. When you talk of the history of the Prophet before and immediately after him, we call the history of the Prophet the Seerah of Rasulullah. The history of the Prophet is called. Shias have not written a lot of seerahs of the Prophet. We do have history of the Prophet in our books of ahadith from the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. But most of the seerah or history of the Prophet has been written by non-Shia historians. So a lot and almost all the history that we present regarding the Prophet is not from us. From Tarikh al-Tabari, from Sirah ibn Hisham, from Tarikh ibn Athir, from Tarikh ibn Kathir, from Tabaqat ibn Sa'ad, the host of them, they are not Shias. Neither is this narration. So Abdullah ibn Umar says, it is night time, but I have to go pledge allegiance, because I cannot spend a night without having allegiance to an imam. He goes to the palace of Hajjaj. Hajjaj is sleeping. Because of his position and influence, he gains access to the chambers of Hajjaj. He comes to the room where Hajjaj is sleeping. Hajjaj wakes up and says, what do you want, Abdullah? He says, I need to pledge allegiance right now. Hajjaj cannot be bothered to wake up from his sleep. He sticks his foot out. He says, here, you can pledge allegiance to my foot. And the narrations say that Abdullah ibn Umar went and took hold of Hajjaj's foot and did bay'ah to his foot and said, bear witness, I have done bay'ah to a caliph, so that if I was to die, I would die a believer. This is given to us by Ibn Abil Hadid in his Sharh of Nahj al-Balagha. Ibn Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili. He is not a Shia. The purpose of narrating this is to say what? Is to say that Muslims have always believed that having an imam is absolutely mandatory. You cannot live as a Muslim unless you have pledged allegiance to someone. Your bay'ah, your neck, so to speak, is not free. It is tied to an imam at all times. So now we take this discussion to the next step. We say, in that case then, if it is wajib, what are the prerequisites for an imam? What qualities should an imam have? The Shias have their qualities very plain and clear, but we are not discussing it from a Shia theological perspective tonight. The Shias will tell you the imam has to be the individual who is the most learned at the time, who is the bravest at the time, who is the most just at the time, who is the most pious at the time, who is infallible. It's very clear. When we ask the Sunni theologians, these are called the mutakallimun. Okay? Mutakallim is one who is an expert, a theologian. When we ask them, what are these qualities? You see, it's one thing to take your understanding of your faith from the internet, and it's another thing to go back to the original sources. These are from the original sources. We are asking not just Sunni scholars who are experts of hadith or tafsir or Quran. These are experts of aqaid, of kalam, ilmul kalam, theologians. Individuals like Abu Bakr al-Baqilani, individuals like at-Taftazani. Okay, these are masters. It's like me saying to the Shias, I'm talking of Sheikh Mufid and Allama Hilli and Sheikh Saduq. Okay, these are very, very, someone like Abu Bakr al-Baqilani is a theologian. He is so highly respected. He is an Ash'ari theologian. He was a chief qadi of the Maliki following. Ibn Taymiyyah, who is seen as the religious head of the Salafis, the Wahhabi understanding of religion, which is the dominant faith in Saudi Arabia, it is principled and based on the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah says about Abu Bakr al-Baqilani, he is the greatest Ash'ari mutakallim to have ever lived, unrivaled and unparalleled by anyone before or after him. He has written 52 volumes just defending the aqidah of the Sunni madhab. We are asking him and individuals of his caliber, what are the qualities of an imam? Some of the qualities they do not agree upon. They're not common across all the theologians. Some of the qualities are common. The uncommon qualities are, for example, he must be a man, he must be just, he must be free, he must be sane, he must be sound in his limbs and his speech and his hearing, he must be courageous. This is not common across all of them. Some say he must be, some say he doesn't have to be courageous. There are 4 qualities that all of them say he must possess, an imam. The first quality an imam must possess, according to the Sunni theologians, is that he must have a Qurayshi descent. He must be a descendant from the tribe of Quraysh. The second quality he must have is he must be very knowledgeable. According to al-Baqilani, he must be at least of the level of a judge, so that he can sit in a court and judge as a Muslim qadi, as a Muslim judge. According to other theologians like Abdul Qadir al-Baghdadi, al-Mawardi and Taftazani, they say he must at least be a mujtahid, meaning he is capable of deriving independent judgment and Islamic laws, of doing ijtihad. That's the second quality, knowledge. The third quality is he must have extensive experience with war planning. He must be able to organize the Muslim troops and to defend the Muslim territories. So he must have experience in war. He can't be someone who used to run away from the battlefield, for example. Okay. The fourth quality is he must be God-fearing and he must be pious. And he must be just. That is also a common, actually, principle. Why? So that he can avenge the rights of the oppressed and avenge them against the unjust. These are the 4 qualities. Furthermore, to emphasize the fact that having an imam is wajib, At-Taftazani now, who is also a theologian, a famous theologian, I quote word for word. He says, we have mentioned in the books of jurisprudence, that means the books of fiqh, that the Muslim ummah has no choice but to have an imam who will protect the Sharia, who will establish the Sunnah, and who will avenge the oppressed. So it's very, very clear that the ummah has to have an imam. And these are the qualities of the imam. Now we observe 2 things here. One thing we observe is that the number of conditions for an imam are not standard from one theologian to another. They are varying. Which leads us to believe that there is no conviction that the Prophet of Islam had clarified what the prerequisites for an imam are. That is why there is this difference of opinion. And the second thing that we understand from this is that because there is no clear guidelines from their perspective, from the Prophet of Islam, therefore these principles are based on personal judgment, from intellectual consideration, perhaps from looking at precedents of some of the previous khulafa, maybe the khulafa al-Rashidun, and from using a principle in Sunni fiqh that is called al-istihsan, which is to use your personal discretion in legal judgments. Fair enough. Now we ask the theologians, the Sunni theologians, tell us what is it that nullifies the imamat of an imam? What cancels the imamat of an imam? And I apologize if this is a little dry, but this is very, very important. I need to quote what they say, and I will only make 3 quotations here from the most famous theologians. Al-Baqilani tells us, and this is a word-for-word translation from the Arabic. I have the references if anyone wishes to have them. An imam is not divested of his position due to his sinfulness or his injustices in usurping the property of others, nor by his hurting people, or taking innocent lives, or squandering the rights of others, or obstructing justice. His imamat is not cancelled. And it is not permissible to rise against him. Instead, it is necessary to admonish him, to make him fearful of God, and to forsake his obedience in a sinful matter that he calls for. At-Tahawi, another theologian, he says, and we do not accept the rising against our imams, those vested with authority. Those vested with authority comes from the ayah of Quran that I recited. From Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 59, where Allah says, أَطِيعُ اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُ الرَّسُولِ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. Obey Allah and obey the messenger and obey the one vested with authority amongst you. And there is a whole tafsir discussion on this, because the word ati'u is used separately for Allah once, and then it is used once only for the Prophet and the ulil amr, which means all the exegetes, the mufassirun, agree that because the word ati'u has been used once for Rasul and for ulil amr, therefore the ulil amr must be obeyed in the same manner as Rasul. So now, At-Tahawi says, we do not accept the rising against our imams, those vested with authority, even if they deviate or they tyrannize, and we do not curse them nor pull back from obeying them, and we see obedience to them as an obligation, as obedience to Allah, the Mighty and Exalted, as long as they do not command us to sin. We pray for their goodness, whether they are righteous or whether they are fasiq, transgressors. Nothing nullifies or revokes them. Okay? And finally, At-Taftazani says, an imam is not dismissed by his sinfulness, nor by oppressing God's creatures. This is because, now here is the reason why. This reason is very important. The reason why he is not dismissed as an imam despite oppressing God's creation, or by committing sins openly, this is because sinfulness manifested and injustices spread from the imams and the emirs after the rightly guided caliphs, after the first 4 caliphs, and our predecessors submitted to them and accepted them. That is why we do not rise against them. In other words, we take the Salaf as an example for us. To put it in modern terms, we do not impeach our leaders. Now, we as Shias, of course, objected to this. We said this is impossible. It is impossible that an imam commits injustices and you keep quiet. They responded by quoting some ahadith that they attributed to the Prophet of Islam, that we regard as being forged. And Sahih Muslim has lots of such narrations, 2 entire chapters just on these sort of narrations. I will quote only one tradition to show you what this tradition was that was attributed to the Prophet. We believe these traditions were forged by the Banu Umayyah. I give you one tradition. This is from Sahih Muslim. The narrator says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He said, يَكُونُ بَعْدِي أَئِمَّةً لَا يَهْتَدُونَ بِهُدَايَ وَلَا يَسْتَنُّونَ بِسُنَّتِي. There will come leaders after me who will not guide according to my guidance and who will not practice my practices, my sunnah. وَسَيَقُومُ رِجَالٌ قُلُوبُهُمْ شَيَاطِينَ فِي جُثْمَانِ إِنْسٍ. And there shall come men after me as your leaders whose hearts will be the hearts of devils in the body of human beings. So the narrator says, قال الراوي قلت كيف أصنع يا رسول الله إن أدركت ذلك. I said, what shall I then do, O Messenger of Allah, if I was to meet such a time? قال تسمع وتطيع للأمير. He said, listen and obey the commander. And then the Prophet added, وَإِن ضَرَبَ ظَهْرَكَ. Even if he whips you and hits you on your back, وَأَخَذَ مَالَكَ. And he takes and usurps your possessions. فَاسْمَعْ وَأَطِيعْ. Listen to him and obey him. This is from Sahih Muslim, volume 6. He has a chapter called the chapter on the command to stay with the majority, and another chapter called the chapter concerning those who separate or divide from the Muslims' affairs. These kind of narrations. There is narration from Hasan al-Basri attributed to the Prophet, that the Prophet specifically said, obey the kings of Banu Umayyah, wa in jaru wa in zalamu, even if they oppress you and even if they tyrannize. We, of course, reject these traditions. Now this, of course, is a whole discussion in itself. But the point we want to make here is that there is an irony, if you haven't caught it yet, that there were certain prerequisites for an imam, that the imam has to be the most knowledgeable, has to be the most just. So now there is a paradox here. The qualities of an imam is that he must be just. But if the imam commits injustices, his imamat is not cancelled. And you must listen and obey to him. And as we shall see in a bit, the imam must be the most knowledgeable. But even if he is ignorant, you cannot remove him from his imamat. So this, of course, is a paradox that needs to be responded, and we don't have the answer to that. So now we went back to our Muslim brothers and we said, fine, you have told us what the qualities of an imam must be. You have told us that an imam's imamat is never nullified. Now, have we agreed until this point that imamat is wajib? Having an imam is wajib. They say yes, having an imam is wajib. We say, tell us why is it wajib to have an imam? Why is it obligatory to have an imam? Now listen to this. It's a very involved but an interesting discussion. You see, the Sunni Muslims in the past used to be of two theological understandings. They used to have the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazilis. The Mu'tazilis were very close to the Shias in their understanding. They produced some great scholars. The famous Mufassir of Quran, Fakhruddin Razi, was a Mu'tazili. Ibn Abil Hadid, who wrote the Sharh of Najul Balagha, was a Mu'tazili. But the Mu'tazilites are to all purpose and intent extinct now. They're very few, if any. Most, if not all, the Sunni Muslims you meet today are of an Ash'ari understanding. Okay? All of Saudi Arabia follows the Ash'ari school of understanding. So we have three opinions as to why imamat is wajib. We have the Ash'ari opinion, we have the Mu'tazili opinion, and then we have the Shia opinion. We asked the Ash'aris, why is an imam, what makes imamat wajib? They said, tajibul imama sam'an. Imamat is wajib because we hear of it. Meaning what? Meaning we proved imamat to be wajib because of history. So we say, how did you prove imamat is wajib through history? Now here's what they say. They say, the Prophet of Islam did not appoint anyone. After he passed away, Medina was grieving. People were weeping on one side, confused on the other. People thought this is the end of Islam. There was so much shock because people never thought the Prophet would pass away, perhaps. Some of the companions could not believe he had passed away. In particular, all books of history says that Umar ibn al-Khattab pulled out his sword and said, if anyone says Rasulullah has died, I will behead him. And he continued saying that until Abu Bakr came, he went inside, he lifted the cloth, he looked at the face of the Prophet, he confirmed the Prophet has passed away. Then he came back, he calmed Umar down, he recited an ayat of Quran, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا الرَّسُولُ أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ إِنْ قَلَبْتُمْ عَلَىٰ أَعْقَابِكُمْ. Muhammad was but a messenger. If he dies or is killed in battle, will you turn on your heels and die? After saying all that, he said, هَذَا مُحَمَّدٌ عَبْدُ اللَّهِ قَدْ مَاتَ. This is Muhammad, the slave of God, he has died. وَأَمَّا رَبُّ مُحَمَّدٍ فَلَنْ يَمُوتَ. As for the Lord of Muhammad, he shall never die. In other words, we must now continue to keep this mission alive. We must continue to keep what the Prophet brought and stood for and preserve it and guide the Muslim Ummah. And so, because of these historic events, the need for an Imam was felt. This is why Imamat is wajib. Do you understand? Now, we said to them, when was this need felt? When did you feel this need? They say the need was felt almost immediately. So immediate that even the Prophet's body could not be washed. There were 8 people only to wash the body of the Prophet, and there were only 6 to bury him. At Ghadir there were 100,000. So the need for an Imam was felt with such urgency, with such immediateness, that immediately the Muslims went and gathered at Saqifah and began deciding the fate of the Ummah. We say, if this urgency was so great, why didn't the Prophet say anything about it? If it's wujub, if it's being wajib was so great that even the Prophet could not be washed and an Imam was needed, how could Allah and His Messenger ignore this? This Rasul, who has told you that even when you go to the washroom, what is wajib, what is haram, what is makruh, what is mustahab, how could He ignore something like this? Now, I want you to listen to this very, very carefully. There are 3 options. Option number 1, Rasulullah appointed someone. Option number 2, he was silent, he didn't appoint anyone. Option number 3, he wasn't silent, he specifically spoke about it, but he said, I am not appointing someone because Allah does not want me to appoint someone. And He wants me to leave this in the affairs of the Ummah. Allah will decide Himself what will happen next. Now get this very, very clearly in your minds. There is no narration, not even a weak one, neither in the Shia books nor in the Sunni books, that the Prophet of Islam said, I am not appointing someone. If he was silent, he should have at least said, here's why I'm not appointing someone. There is no hadith that he said, I'm not appointing someone. So now you're left with 2 options. Either he appointed someone, or he chose to remain silent. If he appointed someone, who did he appoint? If he would have said, I am not appointing someone, then the natural response to that is people would have asked him, what should we do then? He would have said, choose one yourselves. Then the people would have said, what criteria should we use to choose someone? Right? So the only option then, from a non-Shia perspective, is that the Prophet was silent. If the Prophet was silent and did not say anything, then we must assume he did not want anyone appointed. In which case, for the Muslims to appoint someone was bid'ah. We don't use this term too much, but it comes in handy. It is an innovation. It is an innovation because Rasulullah did not want anyone appointed. If you say it is not bid'ah, then is it sunnah? If it is sunnah, then again it is not wajib. At least you should have washed the body of the Prophet and dealt with it after. They say, no, it couldn't. It had to be dealt with right away. Then it means it's wajib. If it's wajib, then number 1, how do you prove it is wajib? From Quran or from Hadith? And number 2, if it is wajib, how could Allah and His Messenger neglect something that was wajib? So you come back again to the same question. Now, in the interest of time, I have to keep forging ahead. We leave this for a moment. We go to the Mu'tazilis. We say to the Mu'tazilis, is imamat wajib? They say yes. How do you prove imamat is wajib? They say, tajibul imama aqlan. Imamat is wajib based on reasoning, not based on history. Very good. Reasoning. We like reasoning. So now we say to them, our response. If imamat is wajib based on reasoning, based on whose reasoning? Your reasoning or the reasoning of Rasulullah? If you say that your reasoning determined that imamat was wajib, but the Prophet kept silent, then it means your reasoning is superior to the reasoning of Rasulullah. Because you are able to determine something is wajib, but he was not. You realized it is necessary, it escaped him. And if you say it is wajib based on the reasoning of Rasulullah, then if it was wajib, why did he not say about it? Why was he quiet? So that doesn't appeal to us. So they turn around and say, fine, then you tell us, what makes imamat wajib? We say, imamat is wajib not because of historical reasons, not because of rationalizing, but because it is a lutf of Allah. Now you need to understand the meaning of the word lutf. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. I thank you immensely for your patience. But this is important because this is being recorded and this will be of great value to new Muslims and for Muslims who are confused about this issue. I'm not looking to convert or brainwash anybody. I'm just looking to express our understanding. And I know many of you understand this and might be thinking, why are you trying to convince me? I already believe in the concept. But it is important for us to also understand how we come to this understanding and conclusion. The word lutf in Arabic has a different meaning from its meaning in Urdu. It's like the word gharib. In Urdu, gharib is a beggar, somebody who's poor. In Arabic, gharib is a stranger, someone who is away from his home. In Urdu, lutf is something you enjoy, like when you say lutf aa gaya. Lutf aa gaya means maza aa gaya. In Arabic, lutf means grace. Lutf of Allah is the grace of Allah, benevolence of Allah. Now let me explain it first in basic terms so that you will understand its meaning in relation to imamat. When a child is born, as soon as it comes out of the womb of its mother, the first thing it needs is air to breathe. Allah makes that air available for the child to breathe, unless a human being interferes and prevents the child from getting that oxygen. Now that oxygen, to reach the body of that human being needs nostrils, and then he needs maybe a windpipe, then he needs lungs, then he needs blood to take the oxygenated blood, then he needs a heart to pump, he needs arteries, he needs veins. So Allah makes all these things available for that human being to survive. Then this human being needs food. It doesn't have teeth, it doesn't have the gag reflex, it doesn't have the ability to swallow. So Allah creates food in the mother of the child to sustain this child. These things that Allah makes available, is it wajib for Allah to give the child? Now there is a yes and a no here. If you say yes, then you are tying Allah's hands and saying Allah has to do it. Allah doesn't have to do anything, He is the master. But if you say He doesn't have to do it, and He can choose not to do it, then you point a finger at His justice and His mercy. Because if He were not to do it, and the child after coming to this world was to die, then Allah would not have been just and kind and merciful to that creation. And for that matter, to everything. The sun He creates is His lutf. The animals who are born with claws to protect themselves, that's their lutf from Allah. So lutf of Allah, or the grace of Allah, is that which Allah makes available. That which is not obligatory on Allah to do, because nothing is obligatory on Him, nothing is wajib on Him, but that which is necessary for Him to provide, because if He does not provide, it points fingers at His justice. That is called lutf. So we say imamat is lutf from Allah. What we mean by this is, even though Allah is not compelled to provide an imam, His justice requires that He makes that available to human beings. Why? Because if Allah has decided He is not sending any more prophets and messengers, and if Allah has decided He is not sending any other revelation, and the Quran is the final revelation, but He wants the world to continue after this messenger, then it is necessary, and if Allah has decided that on the day of judgment He will reward and punish people based on their practice of what He has revealed, and He considers it His justice to punish you if you disobey the teachings of the Quran, then His justice also demands that He also makes someone available to guide and interpret that Quran and preserve its message, so that Allah can then truly say on the day of judgment, I was fair and just to you. If He does not make such a person available, then it points fingers at His justice. Because everything cannot be interpreted directly from the Quran, even if some of the Sahaba thought, Hasbuna kitab Allah. And there are lots and lots of examples that I can give you. Lots. I'll give you two very quick examples. When Abu Bakr was the caliph, a man was caught for drinking alcohol, wine. He was brought, and the caliph wanted to punish him according to Islamic Sharia. But he had to have his day in court. He said to the caliph, I used to live in a community that used to drink wine, and we never knew that there was an ayat of Quran about the prohibition of drinking wine. Today was the first time I heard about this ayat of Quran. So when I drank, I didn't know it was haram. And the books of hadith say that the caliph did not know how to deal with this case, because the man was right. Give you another example. During the caliphate, the second caliphate, the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab, a man came to him and said to him that, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, in Islam there is a law that says, if you divorce your wife 3 times, you cannot take her back. During the days of Jahiliyyah before Islam, I divorced my wife twice. After Islam came and we became Muslims, I have divorced my wife once. So do I still have 2 more chances, or have I used up my 3rd chance? It's a valid question. The caliph could not find the answer in the Quran. He said to him, La anhaka wala amurak. I neither forbid you nor do I permit you. What do you do with that? It's like the other story of the man who had something in his mouth and he was told, you can't swallow it, you can't spit it out. It just stays in your mouth. But that's another story. So there has to be someone who understands Quran after Rasul, who can preserve this message, and therefore imamat is the lutf of Allah. Now if you say imamat is the lutf of Allah, then what is the corollary to that? Corollary means if you put forward a theory, then what does that imply? Right? What does that then lead to? Once you say imamat is a necessity from Allah as a grace, then the corollary to that is that the imam cannot be appointed by election or consensus. That imam must also be appointed by Allah. It must also be mansus min Allah, either directly or through His messenger. Because Allah then will know who is able to fulfill His lutf, so that no one can point fingers at His justice. So this is our understanding. Now, there is still one discussion I have to make very quick, and then I will make a conclusion. I know it has been heavy going, and tomorrow night as well it will be heavy going. I have to tell you this, because the nature of the subject is such. But this is very, very important. These are the kind of things we want to teach our children in the madrasa as well, so that when they discuss this, we don't want people just saying, oh, the Shias, breakaway sect from Islam, believe in their imams, as if it's something fanciful and emotional that we came to conclude. It was a breakaway, it was a political movement, something in history. a group of heretics. No, there are theological proofs for this. There are necessities of religion that depend on this understanding of imamate. Now, we take our argument back once more. This is the final discussion I'm coming to. We say, we go back to the Ash'ari. The Ash'aris are the majority today. We say to them, fine. For a moment, we are going to concede and say, yes, imamate is wajib because of history. Historic events led to the proof that imamate is wajib. The Prophet did not appoint anyone. Okay? It's not the lutf of Allah. History made it wajib. Fine. As long as we are agreed it's wajib. Now, the question we have is, how does an imam become confirmed as the imam? Supposing today I stand up and say, I'm the Khalifa of Rasulullah, I'm the imam. There has to be some way of confirming that I am or not. Those initial criteria are of no value, because we have seen I have to be just, but if I am unjust, my imamate is not taken away. So we said to them, how do you confirm the imamate of someone? They say, because the Prophet did not appoint anyone, it means he wanted the ummah to decide. Therefore, the consensus of the ummah decides who is the imam. Fair enough. We said, whose consensus from the ummah? Because the ummah is a large crowd, even in the time of the Prophet. There was Muslims in Medina, in Basra, in Kufa, all over the place. Right? So whose consensus? They say, those people who have prominence, authority, and influence in the community, their consensus is what matters. These people in Arabic are called Ahlul Hilli wal Aqd. This is a good term to remember. Al-Hilli wal Aqd, Al-Halli wal Aqd. Hal is to untie something, right? To open, like you use hal of a mushkil, for example, right? Hal is to untie, Aqd is to tie. So Al-Halli wal Aqd, Ahl al-Halli wal Aqd are the people who untie and tie. It's just an expression. So in every community, even if you look at this community, for example, you might have the chairman, you might have the vice chairman, the secretary, and all the people who have positions. And then you'll have some people who don't have a position, but they have a status in the community and a certain influence, so that if they stand and speak, the community listens. And they can guide the community in a particular direction. And the leaders would respect their opinion. These are the Ahlul Halli wal Aqd, the people who untie and tie. So they said, these are the people who will decide. We said, fair enough. We agree with that as well. How many from Ahl al-Halli al-Aqd do you need to confirm an imam? So the initial theologian said 5. I said, 5? How did you get the number 5? They said, when the Caliph Umar was dying, he appointed 6 people as a shura and said, out of you 6, decide who will be the Caliph amongst you. So 5 people decided that the Caliph will be Uthman, even though we don't agree that all 5 agreed on that, because Imam Ali was one of them. But they say out of the 6, 5 decided. Therefore 5 people of prominence, because Umar chose 5 prominent people. We said, very well, that's fine as well. But the problem is that when Umar was elected, Abu Bakr elected him on his deathbed alone. So there was no 5 people, there was only 1. So then the theologians changed the rule. They said the consensus of 1 is enough. Consensus means 1 person, as long as he's a person of prominence and people respect his view. We said that is fine as well. But the problem is that when Abu Bakr was elected, there was no respect. There was a fight. So there was 1 individual who chose Abu Bakr, but again there was no the community's respect of the view of that 1 individual. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What happened with Saqifa was that Sa'ad bin Ubadah, who was the leader of the Khazraj tribe from the Ansar, set up a meeting. The Ansar wanted to elect Sa'ad as the Caliph. In the meantime, Abu Bakr and Umar came to know that there is an election happening. They rushed to the scene to talk to them and start reasoning with them. The Ansar said, we select Sa'ad as our Caliph. Abu Bakr stood up and said, you cannot, because this has to come from the Muhajir. The Ansar said, if it has to be from the Muhajir, then we will only accept Ali bin Abi Talib. Zubair bin al-Awam pulled out a sword. This is all from Tariq, not Shia Tariq. I told you the Sirah is not from the Shias. Zubair pulled out a sword at Saqifa. He said, I will not put this sword back unless people do bay'ah of Ali. Ali was the only person whose name was being taken in Saqifa, even though he was not there himself. This shows that people had an inclination to that. At this point, there was a commotion. People started arguing. The books of history say that Umar went and grabbed the sword of Zubair. He struck it on a stone. He broke the sword. They started calling each other names. The books of history says the Muslims behaved like the days of Jahiliyyah. Umar called Zubair a dog as well. He said, alaykum bil kalb. He pounced upon Sa'ad. Sa'ad was beaten. His ribs were broken. He died after a few days. In this commotion, in this fighting, what Umar did was, he said to Abu Bakr, extend your hand. Abu Bakr extended his hand. Umar put his hand and said, I do bay'ah of him. Now the Ansar were two tribes. As soon as he did, the person sitting next to him, he did bay'ah. Then the next person did bay'ah. Now the tribe of Aus began doing bay'ah of Abu Bakr. So those people of Khazraj said, now if we don't do bay'ah, we'll get left behind. So they started doing it. In that commotion, an election took place. Later on, when Umar became the caliph, he is reported to have said in the history books of the Muslims, and I quote his words, he says, Wallahi inna amra bay'ata Abi Bakrin kana faltatan. I swear by Allah, the affair of the allegiance to Abu Bakr was a mistake, was an error, and was a big mess. It was a falta. Faltatan is, you can check the dictionary. It means it's an error. It's a mistake. فَوَقَى اللَّهُ الْعُمَّةِ مِنْ شَرِّهَا. But Allah protected the ummah from its evil. And if anyone attempts to do anything like that again, I will behead him. Okay? This is what happened at Saqifa. So we come back to our discussion. We say, well, if you need one person's consensus, but that one person has to be respected unanimously, that did not happen in the case of Abu Bakr. So then they revise the condition. They say, as long as one person pledges allegiance, or some people pledge allegiance, it becomes wajib even if the others don't pledge allegiance to him. And now this comes from a very great theologian who is called Al-Juwayni. Al-Juwayni is the teacher of Ghazali. Those of you who take an interest in Islamic history, you know Ghazali is a very great personality in Islam. Imam al-Ghazali, probably the first person to be called Hujjatul Islam, al-Ghazali, the author of Ihya Ulumuddin. His teacher is Al-Juwayni. Al-Juwayni was known as Imam al-Haramain, Imam of Makkah and Medina. If you speak in Islamic theology and say Imam al-Haramain without taking a name, people know you're talking of Al-Juwayni. Al-Juwayni says, consensus is not necessary for an imam's imamat to be confirmed. بَلْ تَنْعَقِدُ الْإِمَامَ وَإِنْ لَمْ تُجْمَعَ الْأُمَّةِ عَلَىٰ عَقْدِهِ. But his imamat is confirmed even if the ummah do not unite and agree on his imamat. And notice he is not saying khilafat, he is saying imamat. This is very important. Now the Shias are very hard to keep quiet. We said that is also fine. We have another question. Now what do you say about Yazid and Muawiyah? Because Muawiyah took khilafat by force and treachery. So there was not even the one person who was elected by some and opposed by some. Ma'mun killed his brother Amin after his father Harun al-Rashid died in order to get khilafat. So now there is no even election of one prominent person, even if the Muslims are divided on it. So now how do you confirm his imamat? So finally they said, an imam's imamat is confirmed by any standard, even if he takes it with force and subjugation and oppression. So the mold just broke now completely. There is no yardstick now. And I want to give you two quotes, summarize, and then come to Masaib. The first quote is from Al-Isfara'ini. Al-Isfara'ini is a famous theologian, Sunni theologian. He has a book called Ihqaqul Haqq. He writes in his book Ihqaqul Haqq, imamat is confirmed even with force and subjugation. And for those of you who understand Arabic, he says, وَلَوْ كَانَ فَاسِقًا أَوْ جَاهِلًا أَوْ أَعْجَمِيًا. Even if he is a transgressor, an open sinner, and he is ignorant, and he is non-Arab. So these three are fall in one class. Ignorance, transgressors, and non-Arabs. Any of these. Because why? Originally, the rule was he must be from Quraysh. And At-Taftazani, whom we mentioned before, in his book, he says, the imamat of an imam is confirmed even bil-qahri wal-istila, with force and subjugation. In aqadat al-khilafatu lahu waqadha idha kana fasiqan aw jahilan. His imamat is confirmed even if he is an oppressor, if he is an open sinner, and he is ignorant. In other words, what was happening now is a statement to cover the sins of everyone and say even Yazid can be ulil amr, and obedience to him is like obedience to the Prophet. The corollary to that is that today the Muslims who say radiyallahu an after the name of Yazid, those who say this, they also say that Imam Hussein was wrong in rising against Yazid. Why? Because you cannot rise against an Imam وَلَوْ كَانَ فَاسِقًا أَوْ جَاهِلًا. So Hussein did not know all those ahadith of his grandfather, that even if the leader usurps your rights and hits you and whips you, isma' wa ati, listen and obey. But these people know that Hussein was wrong. So I make a few observations and then I have ended, I promise. The first thing we want to summarize for tonight, because we said tonight we're discussing imamah from a theological perspective, tomorrow from a history perspective. The first thing we want to confirm again is that the concept of imamat very, very much exists in all the Muslims, Shia and Sunni. Okay? The last time, a couple of years back, I did a search on the internet on the concept of imamat in Quran. I found an article by an individual who claims he was a Shia and then he became a Sunni. And in that article he writes, he says, I was a Shia and I know how to debate with the Shias. And he says, when you want to defeat the Shias, don't argue with them about anything. Don't argue with them about the right of Khilafat, about Ghadir, about the marriage of Mut'ah, about this or that. You will fail. The only way to fight the Shias is tell them that imamat is something you innovated. There is no place for it in Islam. Now obviously he changed too soon because he's not aware of all these theologians and their opinions. But imamat is very much a belief in all Muslims. Yes, we disagree on the qualities of an imam. If you tell me as a non-Shia that you Shias believe your imams are infallible, that I accept. And there are reasons why we believe that. And we will be happy to share those reasons with you. But don't tell me that Muslims do not believe in the concept of imamat. They are talking about it and using the word imamat, 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 not khilafat only. That is number one. Number two, as we have seen, the rules of how an imam gets elected were reverse engineered. Do you understand the term reverse engineered? Meaning, instead of setting the rules and saying these are the qualities of an imam and then saying who fits this bill, does Jaffer as-Sadiq alayhi salam fit this bill that he should be our imam? The way it was done was the other way around. Look who became the imams. And then whoever became the imams, look at their qualities. Those are the qualities and the prerequisites of an imam. This reminds me of the saying that says, if you never want to be wrong, shoot your arrow first, and then whatever you hit, you call that your target. You can never be wrong, because whatever you hit will be bullseye. It's a bit like me and hockey, right? I don't understand the game, but my team always wins. Because I don't start cheering like the rest of you before the game starts, and right? I wait and see who's winning. Whoever's winning, that's my team, right? This is very important to understand how these concepts came into being. Now, I want to say just one thing, and listen to this, how beautifully things work. Look at Allah's power, how He makes things come to be. You will be amazed if you have never thought of this point. There are two opinions now in Muslims. Either the Prophet appointed someone, or he didn't appoint someone. Those who say he appointed someone, they say he appointed Ali bin Abi Talib. There is not a single Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. There is not a single person who mentions any other name besides the name of Ali. If there is any Muslim of any madhab, of any sect, who believes that the Prophet appointed someone, they only believe it was Ali. There is no second name that is given out in history, that the Prophet mentioned this person, right? So if you go by those who say the Prophet appointed someone, then the name is Ali. If you go by those who say the Prophet did not appoint someone, their initial premise is that the Prophet did not appoint someone because he wanted the Ummah to decide who to appoint. The Ummah to come together and unanimously vote for one person. Now the irony and the beauty of this thing is that even by that yardstick, the only person who qualifies is Ali. Think about this for a minute. The Caliph Abu Bakr, I told you. Okay, we're not here to curse, abuse anybody. This is history. The Caliph Abu Bakr was chosen at Saqifa amidst a lot of disagreement. There was no unanimity there. Because Sa'ad bin Ubadah, a very prominent member and Sahaba, was opposing it. His son Qais opposed it. Habab bin Munzir, who was there, opposed it. Zubair bin al-Awam opposed it. Imam Ali opposed it. The Banu Hashim opposed it. The Khazraj tribe opposed it. So there was no unanimous vote for him. The Caliph Umar was appointed by Abu Bakr on his deathbed. So there was no, again, unanimous vote by the Muslims. The Caliph Uthman was appointed by Shura with 5 or 6 people. Now the Caliph Uthman was murdered and he did not stay for any time. He died immediately. So there was no time for him to appoint anyone. The Muslims thronged at the door of Ali and said, you have to be our Caliph and our Imam. And he said, wait for 3 days and think about it. After 3 days, they still came to his door to the point that Ali says in Nahjul Balagha, they almost crushed my toes. After Ali, there was again never a vote like this for the Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas. The only person who opposed Ali was Muawiyah in Damascus, but all the other Muslim regions voted for him. So even if you go by the measure that the Prophet did not appoint anyone, and he wanted the Muslims to unanimously decide on someone, out of all the caliphs who have come in Islamic history, the only person who fit that bill was Ali bin Abi Talib. Salawatullahi wa salam alayhi. Salli ala wa ali Muhammad. So Allah works in mysterious ways. And inshallah tomorrow night, I will again talk to you the issue of imamat from history and give you ample evidence from history why and how many times Ali was appointed. How many times? See, just before coming to the mosque, I was watching the Ahlul Bayt channel, and somebody asked a question to one of the scholars there and said, if Khilafat was so important, why did the Prophet wait until his deathbed to ask for a paper and pen? Why didn't he appoint months ahead or years ahead? I will tell you tomorrow night how many times he mentioned Ali. The fact, it's a good question, but the fact that the Prophet mentioned, give me a paper and pen, shows that even the Prophet was losing hope that people will follow his previous instructions. And it goes beyond that. Tomorrow, inshallah, during the day, we have paying tribute to the Prophet and Masaib. So we will talk about this in more detail. Where, at what point did people start opposing the Prophet and started standing in the way of what he intended and trying to wrest power and control from his hands? A week before the passing away of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When the Prophet of Islam realized that now there will be opposition, he, as a last strategy trying to free Medina, he sent Usama bin Zayd, the son of Zayd bin Harith, who was a freed slave and the adopted son of Rasulullah, out on an expedition. He said to the Muslims, all of you go with Osama on this expedition to Tabuk except for Ali. The Muslims refused to go. At first they made excuses and said, Osama is too young, he is only 18 years old. How did Rasulullah appoint us to follow such a young lad? As the days came closer, we are told that the Prophet of Islam began falling ill. He started having severe headaches at first. Then again the Prophet started saying, go to the Jaysh of Osama. The Muslims began saying, we are concerned about the health of the Prophet, we will not go. At one point Rasulullah cursed those who did not go. He said, La'anallahu man takhallafa jaysh Osama. May Allah curse those who do not go with Osama. Yet the Muslims refused to go. Look at the opposition flying in the face of Rasulullah. The days came by. All Muslim historians say that regardless of the date that they disagree on, Rasulullah passed away on a Monday soon after the time of Dhuhr. The Thursday before he passed away, he fell ill considerably. A large number of companions gathered in the house of Rasulullah. Out of concern for him perhaps, and out of to see what was happening to him. At one point Rasulullah opened his eyes and saw his room filled with his companions and with people around him. He said to them, give me a paper and a pen that I may write something for you so that you will never go astray after me, so that you will never be divided after me. What more could you want, O Muslims, than this from your Prophet? Every man has this right that when he is dying, you listen to his will. Can you imagine somebody dying, a stranger, telling you, I am dying, I wish to make a will, and that you turn him away? All Rasulullah wanted was a paper and a pen. At this point, all history books record that Umar ibn al-Khattab stood up. He did not say, he said, the Prophet is speaking nonsense, na'udhu billah. But he did not say the Prophet is speaking nonsense. He said the man is uttering nonsense. Inna rajulun la yahjur. He is delirious with fever. He does not know what he is saying. A commotion began in the room of the Prophet. The women behind the curtain saying, give the Prophet something to write. Give him, it is his last wish. And here Umar is saying, Hasbuna kitab Allah. The book of God is enough for us. We do not want to know what he is saying. Voices were raised, shouting at each other. The Prophet got upset. He began reciting the Quran. He began saying, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tarfa'u aswatakum fawqa sawtin nabi. O you who believe, do not raise your voices above the voice of the Prophet. At this point, the Prophet was so upset with the people that he said to them, Qumu anni. Get out from here, all of you. Can you imagine Rasulullah saying this? Get out from here, all of you. Now people ask, why did the Prophet not insist and say, give me a paper, I still want to write? There is a reason why he did not do that. Because once you have accused him of being taken with fever and uttering nonsense, now anything he writes, you will say he wrote this when he was not in his senses. So what was the point of writing it at that point? Qumu anni. This was such a calamity. This was such a calamity, my dear brothers and sisters, that Imam Bukhari mentions this incident in 5 different places. It is known as Raziyatu Yawmul Khamis, the calamity of the Thursday. And Bukhari mentions that when people would ask Abdullah ibn Abbas after the passing away of the Prophet, tell us about this incident of the paper and the pen. He says Abdullah ibn Abbas would sit in the mosque of the Prophet. He would cry and he would cry and he would cry until his beard would be wet with his tears. And the pebbles below him would get wet with his tears. He would say, alas, Raziyatu Yawmul Khamis, the calamity of the Thursday. If only we would have allowed the Prophet to write something for us. Now that people had left and the Prophet was left alone, who was he left with now? He was left with Ali, he was left with Fatima, he was left with Hassan, he was left with Hussein. We are told in one narration that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein came running towards their Jadd, towards Rasulullah. Imam Ali tried to hold the little boys back from Rasulullah. Rasulullah said to Ali, O Ali, da'ahum ashummahuma wa yashummani. O Ali, let my grandsons come to me. Let me smell their scent for the last time. O Rasulullah, you do not know what will happen to your grandchildren after you. We are told Hassan came to Rasulullah. He placed his cheek on the cheek of Rasulullah and began crying and weeping. Hussein placed his head on the chest of Rasulullah. Rasulullah put his arms around his grandsons. He wept with them for a while. Fatima sat beside Rasulullah. Ali had the head of Rasulullah in his laps. Fatima is now remembering perhaps the days she spent with her father. Rasulullah used to call her Abiha. She was like a mother to her father. All the days of Tabligh, when Rasulullah used to go out to preach, when people would take thorns and line them on the street so that they should hurt Rasulullah, when people would go to their rooftops and throw filth on Rasulullah, it was Fatima who would sit with her father. When people would throw rocks at Rasulullah and he would come home bleeding, it was Fatima who would sit and treat her father's wounds. It was Fatima who would sit and remove the thorns from her father's feet. Fatima is sitting there weeping and looking at Rasulullah. Rasulullah opens his eyes and looks at Fatima. "Why are you crying, my dear daughter?" Fatima says, "I'm crying because of separation from you." Rasulullah says something to Fatima, after which she smiles. Later on she says, "Rasulullah promised me I will be the first one to meet him after his demise." In a little while a knock is heard on the door. Fatima hears a very strange voice saying, "Ana rajulun gharib." Fatima hears the voice of a stranger. She says to him, "Return, may Allah have mercy on you." Rasulullah is not able to see anyone. A little time passes, again somebody knocks on the door. "Gharibun yasta'adhinu ala Rasulullah." A stranger has come asking permission to see Rasulullah. Now the Messenger of Allah opens his eyes. He says, "Oh Fatima, do you not know who this is? This is Malakul Maut, O Fatima. It is the sharaf and the honor of your house, O Fatima, that the angel of death asks permission." I would say, "Ya Rasulullah, this door that the angel of death asks permission for, come and see this door 3 days from now when there is firewood at the door and it is being burnt." Fatima opened the door and welcomed the angel of death. She says, "Something came in that sounded like the whispering of a breeze. It came close to us and said, 'Assalamu alaykum ya Ahla Baytin Nubuwa.' O angel of death, you do salam to Ahlul Bayt. In a few days there will be no one to return the salam of Ali." Rasulullah, Jibreel asked Rasulullah, "O Ahmad, Allah has given you the choice if you wish to remain." The last words of Rasulullah, he says, "Bal ila rafiq al-a'la." Nay, I wish to return to my exalted friend. He turns and looks to Ali. As he takes his last breath, Ali puts his hand at the mouth of Rasulullah. He takes the breath of Rasulullah and wipes it on his face. "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." Ali turns to the women in the house and says, "A'zam Allahu ujurakum bi nabiyyikum." May Allah reward you for your grief over your messenger, for Allah has taken his messenger to him. The women began crying. The voices were heard into the mosque. A commotion began in the house of Rasulullah. Ali was left with Rasulullah. The Muslims came briefly to confirm Rasulullah has passed away. Then they all went to Saqifa. I told you only 8 were left to help Ali wash the body of Rasulullah. Ali is washing the body of Rasulullah and crying, "Ma a'zamul musibatu alayna haythu faqadnak wa haythu inqata anna al-wahyu fa inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." Ali began crying, "Oh, what a calamity has befallen us that the revelation has been separated from us from Allah. Oh, what calamity has befallen us that we have lost Rasulullah." The time came to bury Rasulullah. You can imagine how Fatima was hurt when she realized there was only 6 people to bury her father. I would say, "Oh Fatima, still be grateful to Allah, there are 6 people to bury your father. Oh Fatima, when you pass away, it will be in the middle of the night, there will be no one to come to your funeral. Oh Fatima, when Ali is buried, he will be buried in hiding. Oh Fatima, when Hassan is buried, when Hassan wishes to be buried, his body will be pierced with arrows and be brought back to the house again. Oh Fatima, come to Karbala 10 years later, there will be no one to bury your Hussein. Umar ibn Saad will place the body of your Hussein and say, 'Trample the body of Hussein.' Everyone will come forward and take the body of their family members and loved ones. There will be no one to say, 'Someone save the body of the son of Fatima. Someone give a shroud and a burial to the son of Fatima.' ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون ومحمدا وعليا ماطم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الميامين المظلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم صلوات على محمد وآل محمد صل على محمد. Tonight we have gathered to mark the martyrdom and passing away and shahadat of Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is also a continuation from last night and is the second in a two-part series on the subject of the concept of imamat in Islam. Last night we discussed imamat from the perspective of Islamic theology or ilm al-kalam, and tonight we wish to discuss imamat from the perspective of history or tarikh. Obviously, when we talk of tarikh and history, we will bring it up to the most recent events, and therefore in some sense it is a historic as well as a political analysis of the issue and concept of imamah. I mentioned last night that there were two particular audiences that I was addressing in addition to all of you as well. One were those Muslims who are non-Shias but who hold this belief that the concept of imamat is alien or foreign to Islam or to Orthodox Islam, and it was introduced by the Shias. And we talked about that yesterday extensively to prove that imamat is believed by all Muslims, even if they differ on what the qualities of an imam must be or how an imam gets elected. The other group that I said I was keen to address as well were those Muslims who have embraced Islam more recently, who usually refer to themselves as revert Muslims, but who also say that I am neither a Shia nor a Sunni. I am just a Muslim. And it is these Muslims in particular that I wish to address today. So yesterday, the main focus was on those Sunni Muslims who say imamat is foreign to Islam. We have dealt with that. Tonight we want to address those Muslims who say it suffices to believe in the Quran and Rasul, and one can be a Muslim without being of any particular leaning or inclination or following any particular school of thought. And we want to dispel that idea and see why when you become a Muslim or when you say you are a Muslim, you cannot sit on the fence on this issue. You must take a position. I would rather you say you are a Sunni Muslim than say I am neither Shia nor Sunni. And in fact, it is impossible to be something besides that, because the moment it is time for Salat and you do wudu, the way you do wudu will tell me who you are. So you can say all you like, I am not Shia, I am Sunni, I am not Sunni, but how you pray will tell me who you are. But from an ideological and theological perspective as well, it is important to have an understanding of who we follow in our understanding of the Quran and of course the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Before we begin the subject though, just a correction from last night that was brought to my attention. Last night when I was talking about the two main understandings in theology amongst the Sunni Muslims, the Ash'ari and the Mu'tazili, and I gave some examples of scholars from each side, I mentioned that Fakhruddin Razi was a Mu'tazili, and it was brought to my attention that he was actually an Ash'ari. And I just want to shed a little light on this. It is true that most scholars will say that Fakhruddin al-Razi was an Ash'ari scholar of a Shafi'i following from a fiqh perspective. However, it is interesting to note as well that he did hold certain views that were Mu'tazili. For example, if you look at the Encyclopedia of Islamic Philosophy that was edited by Oliver Leaman and I think Sayyid Hussein Nasr as well, there is an article in there by John Cooper on Fakhruddin Razi. And he talks about how Fakhruddin Razi had certain differing opinions from the Ash'aris on issues like free will, for example, although that's not our discussion. And the Wahhabi understanding, they call themselves Salafi. When I say Wahhabi, I don't mean in a derogatory manner, but because if I say Salafi, most of you don't understand who I'm referring to. As followers of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab or Abdul Wahhab, they have actually set up a website called ash'aris.com. And on their website, they try to prove this idea that there are true Ash'aris and false Ash'aris. And they divide them as early Ash'aris and later Ash'aris. And they say that individuals like Ash'ari himself, the founder, and al-Baqilani, whom I mentioned yesterday a number of times, they are true Ash'aris and what they call early Ash'aris. And they actually have condemned Fakhruddin Razi and al-Ghazali as later Ash'aris. And the reason they condemn them is they say they held certain views that were Mu'tazili. So if you like, you could say Fakhruddin Razi was a later Ash'ari or an early Mu'tazili in whatever way you want to understand it. But that is not our subject. It's just to clarify this because it's on record and I don't want to have misled anyone on this. So I just wanted to clarify this. If you can recite the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. In continuing our discussion then, when we talk about the concept of imamat in history, our first discussion is from the books of seerah and history. Can we find examples where the Messenger of Allah himself, peace be on him and his family, expressed an opinion about his successorship? Not from the books of the Shia. From the books of the Shia, it is very clear that he expressed his opinion and that he made it very clear that Ali alayhi salam was to be his successor. But from the perspective, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, from the perspective of the non-Shias, can we look and find examples? And indeed we can. The first example we get is from Sirah ibn Hisham, a very well-known biography of the Prophet. In that it says that when the Prophet invited Banu Amir, this was a tribe that he invited towards Islam, and these was the days when he was still in Mecca, he hadn't yet been invited to Medina, they offered to embrace Islam on a condition. They said to him, "We will accept your message on the condition that if you gain power, ayakunu lana al-amr min ba'dik, will we have any authority and any say in the matter after your passing away?" And Ibn Hisham in his seerah says that even at a time when Muslims were few in number and weak, and you would imagine that the Prophet was looking for as much support as possible, he refused to compromise on this issue. He said to them, "Al-amru ila Allah yada'ahu haythu yasha." This matter is in Allah's hands. He will place it wherever He pleases. And of course, he could have said at that point that this matter is in the hands of the Ummah, or this matter is in the hands of the people who will have influence, the Ahlul Halli wal Aqd that we mentioned yesterday. But he didn't mention any of this. He said, "No, I cannot promise you anything like that." This is one example. The other example as well from Sirah ibn Hisham says that after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam moved to Medina and established himself there, he sent a man as an ambassador called Salit bin Amr to Yamama. Yamama was a place that was ruled by a Christian ruler, And he sent this Salit bin Amir there to invite them to Islam. The ruler there said to Salit, sending a message back to the Prophet, he said, "What you invite me to is indeed beautiful. But I am a poet and I am an orator, and the Arabs venerate and honor me. Give me some authority and I will follow you. فَاجْعَلْ لِي بَعْدَكَ الْأَمْرِ أَتَّبِعُكَ." Give me some authority, I will follow you. And again we are told the Prophet refused to compromise on this issue. And in fact he said, even if he asks me for an inch of land, I will not give it to him. This is entirely in God's hands. In other words, I am not the one who's going to choose my successor. Allah will choose who should succeed me. And there is another famous history that records the history of the Prophet that's known as Tariq ibn Kathir. Tariq ibn Kathir says that this ruler of Yamama actually threatened the Prophet and said, if you give me an assurance that I have some power and some successorship after you, I will follow you. But if you deny me this, then I will bring an army and fight you. And the Prophet again said, Allahumma akfinihi. Oh Allah, suffice for me against him. But he refused to compromise on this issue. So we see that even from the books of the known Shias, there were incidents where people explicitly asked the Prophet for authority and position after him, but he refused to compromise on this. We then bring this discussion to another issue and say, did the Sahaba have an opinion on this issue of Khilafat and Imamat, how important it was or it wasn't? And I want to give you a few glimpses on how the Caliphs deemed this to be so important in their own times of rule. There is a very famous book on this issue of Imamat and Khilafat by a scholar, a non-Shia scholar called Ibn Qutaybah. Ibn Qutayba's book is called Al-Imamatu was-Siyasa. Unfortunately, I don't believe it is in English. Ibn Qutaybah says that when the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab was dying, he sent his son Abdullah. We talked about Abdullah yesterday, you remember, when he went to Hajjaj to pledge allegiance. He said when Umar was dying, he sent his son Abdullah to the wife of the Prophet Aisha to ask permission that once he has died, he would like to be buried next to the Prophet and Abu Bakr. And because her room was adjacent to the grave of the Prophet, he wanted permission that he should be buried within that area there. And so Ibn Qutaybah says that Abdullah bin Umar came to al-Mu'mineen Aisha, asked for permission. She gladly allowed it and said it would be an honor. And then she said to Abdullah to take a message back to his dying father. Now these are the words of Ibn Qutaybah, I quote. She says to him, Ya bunayya, abligh Umara salami wa qul lahu. My son, give my greetings to Umar and say to him, La tuda' ummatu Muhammad bila ra'. Do not forsake and abandon the nation and the ummah of Muhammad without a shepherd, without someone to look after them. Istakhlif alayhim. Appoint someone as a successor, as a khalifa over them. فَإِنِّي أَخْشَى عَلَيْهِمُ الْفِتْنَةِ. For indeed I fear mischief and trials for them if you do not appoint someone. And so he says that Abdullah ibn Umar came and advised his father, and his father then appointed the Shura, from which then the Caliph Uthman was appointed. So we see then that also from the history of the Muslims, this issue of successorship was of concern to all the prominent people, including the wives of the Prophet. Similar to this, Ibn Qutaybah in his book As-Siyasatu Al-Imamatu was-Siyasa says that after Muawiyah took leadership and Khilafat from Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he came to Medina to promote and push for his son Yazid to be his successor. And in Medina again, interestingly enough, he met Abdullah bin Umar. And his words to Abdullah bin Umar, according to Ibn Qutaybah again, is, I dislike the idea of leaving the ummah of Muhammad after me like sheep without a shepherd. That this nation must have a shepherd, and that is why I am pushing for Yazid to be there. And so the understanding then that the Muslims have from all this is that the caliphs were very, very concerned about the ummah. And they had so much love and so much compassion for the ummah that they would not tolerate the idea that this ummah should be scattered like sheep without a shepherd. Yet the Prophet was not concerned. See, this is the issue that we have. If you look at the incident of how the Caliph Umar was appointed, again from sources that are not Shia, we are told that when Abu Bakr was dying, he called Uthman to write his will, who then became the third Caliph. And we are told that Uthman was sitting by his bedside, and Abu Bakr said to Uthman, write in my will, I, Abu Bakr, the son of Abu Quhafa, appoint after me, and then he fainted. When he gained consciousness, he said to Uthman, let us continue writing the will. Uthman said, there is no need, I have finished it. He said, what did you write? He said, I wrote, I, Abu Bakr, the son of Abu Quhafa, appoint after me Umar ibn al-Khattab. To which Abu Bakr said, thank God for your foresight. These are not the exact words, this is my paraphrasing. But he said, thank God for your foresight, because had you not done this, the ummah would have been left without a guide. Or he may have said, thank God for appointing just the person I wanted to appoint. But the idea is that all the people of prominence could not accept this fact that the ummah should be without a guide, building upon what we discussed yesterday. So we come back to this issue again, that how is it possible that every caliph had this concern, that the ummah are like sheep, they need a shepherd and a guide. But the Prophet, Allah and His Messenger are absolutely quiet. They have no statement on this issue at all, what happens to the ummah. And this is something that is really a matter that we need to get a response. We're just asking for an answer. We're not looking to convince or convert anyone. We're saying, tell us, how is this possible? What could be the reason that the Prophet would be absolutely quiet? Not even a weak hadith to say, I have been asked not to appoint someone. Just silence. One argument that may come is that the Messenger of Allah was a messenger. He wasn't a ruler. He wasn't a temporal ruler like the others. And therefore, it was not for him to appoint someone. He just brought a message. If that is the case, then we must look at history and say, did Rasulullah simply sit at home and deliver messages? Or did he take an active role in organizing society? Did he play a very active role in what you might call interfere in how the society's culture, social, political, economic structure would be formed? Did he actually take part in all the battles, in all the decision making? Did he bring about a certain constitution by which an Islamic state was established in Medina, which is the case? If the argument is he was not a ruler, then he should have just stayed at home and maybe come out once a day or every Friday morning and say, oh people, I'm a messenger. Allah has revealed to me this ayat. This is the ayat. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm going home. Every day come, deliver the message, go away. But this is not the case. He takes a very, very involved role in every single decision making. So it cannot be possible that he is simply someone who is delivering the message. We also ask this question, that the demise of the Prophet was not sudden and unexpected. It wasn't like the case of the Caliph Uthman, where people just stormed into his palace and just stabbed him and killed him, and there was no opportunity to make a statement. We know well ahead that when he went for the final pilgrimage, and he asked people to join him because it was his final pilgrimage, Shia and Sunni, even those who don't mention, if you go to the websites that talk about the khutbah, the sermon at Ghadir Khum, even though Ghadir Khum cannot be denied, there is so much research on that. The only thing that can be denied is the meaning of the word Mawla, that when the Prophet said, Man kuntu mawlahu, okay, and that is clutching at straws, because as a poet put it very well, in vain you argue the meaning of Mawla. Ali is Mawla in the same sense that the Prophet is Mawla. If the Prophet is a friend to you, then Ali is a friend to you. It's in the same sense, Man kuntu mawlahu fahadha aliyu mawla. But no one can deny the event that took place. But even the websites that give the whole sermon and the books that narrate the whole sermon, even when they don't mention at all the issue of Ali and Man kuntu mawla, they say the Prophet said other things as well. They do mention this fact, that he said to the people, I have been summoned by my Lord and I will respond to that. And it is possible that I will not be with you much longer. This is very, very clear. Everyone has accepted this and quoted this. You pick any place this khutbah, you will see these words. So that means the Muslims knew he is leaving. This is like 2 months before his passing away. And then when he falls sick, when he's ill, there is a whole week where people are expecting him to pass away any time. Right? When he's gaining conscious, he's unconscious, he has a bandage around his head, someone else is leading prayers in his place. So it is not a shock or a surprise. How is it possible that not one Sahaba came and asked the Prophet that if God forbid something should happen to you, who do we follow after you? Absolute silence. This just really defies all logic, and it just doesn't make any sense. And then you add to that this issue that I said last night as well, that when he says, give me something to write so that you don't go astray after me, he is opposed, he is accused of not speaking sense, and there is a commotion, and there's an argument that the book of God is enough for us. It is very clear that there was some attempt to stop from a declaration being made, right? I mean, even if you are naive, you surely must smell something here, because if you don't, I can smell something, right? It is not possible that there would be just deafening silence. So these are the arguments we bring to this whole discussion to say that the opinion of the Prophet from the Sirah ibn Hisham, Tarikh ibn Kathir, and from the behavior of the Sahaba, and from historic events is very, very clear that it is not possible that this was a matter that Allah and His Messenger would have just ignored and not have absolutely anything to say about. If you can recite Salawat ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Now I want to take this discussion to another level, and this is where I in particular want to address my revert Muslim brothers and sisters who say, I'm a Muslim, I am neither this nor that. The question that is asked, maybe the first question that will come to the mind of a revert Muslim when they come to Islam and they're thinking what is right, what is wrong, the first question that will come to mind is, how could the majority be wrong? How could so many be wrong? If the Shias are right, why are they so few in number? Okay? And I want to take a glimpse at how you study history. You see, history, even though it strives to be unbiased, it is always biased. And history, for the most part, is written by those who are in power and in authority. And it is their word that always counts as the gospel truth. Even the official history of Canada is written by the government of Canada, and it is preserved in the library of the Parliament. You can stand up and start writing the history of Canada if you like, but that's the unofficial history of Canada. It doesn't have any value. The one that's the history of Canada will come from the government. They will write the history of the country, right? And so even when a scholar writes history, you have to watch who is this scholar coming from, what is his perspective, who is funding that project. Even when a person sits at home and writes, he has to earn a living. Somebody is going to pay him to write that history. To give you a glimpse of how history can be biased even in this day and age, I've brought a book with me here that I want to show you. Just, the reason I bring the book is I know some of you may have been frightened when you saw me bring this book in, thinking, oh my God, tonight is going to be a long night. I only want to bring it here because a lot of times I say things from the pulpit, but you might be going, I wonder if he really, is speaking from first-hand experience or he heard it from someone else. Okay? This is a book that is called The New Encyclopedia of Islam. It is a revision of a classic work called The Concise Encyclopedia of Islam, and it says the author is Cyril Glasse, or Glass, and it's Glasse, I think, and it has an introduction by Professor Houston Smith. Okay, it's an academic work from a university, and the author is praised because it's a one-man's work. Usually an encyclopedia would be written by a whole team of people, and it has many entries in it. I can't remember now if it's 1,200 or 12,000, but when you read it at first, it's very impressive, but it has very, very strong biases against the Shia. When you read the entry on Imam Hassan, when you read the entry on Imam al-Mahdi, when you read the entries on the Shias, you can see very, very clear biases in this, and you're welcome to take a look at it after the program. But what really caught my eye is the subtle manner in which a person expresses his bias without making it obvious, but you will see it if you look at it carefully, right? What the author does is, and this book is just so you know how much there is a need for the Shias to get into the academic field and start contributing and expressing the opinion of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and not just expressing it within the mosques and the Husayniyas, but we really need to go out into the universities and make a statement and show people the other side of Islam, because people are speaking on our behalf, right? Most encyclopedias may not be in English, the ones on Islam. The ones that are in English are very expensive and not affordable by an individual. This is the only encyclopedia on Islam that is in English and affordable to an individual, right? And even then, it is about $50, $60. Now, at the back, there is an appendix where this author has put a chart to show how the different sects of Islam are divided. Branches of Islam. Okay? Now look at the bias. The bias is this. Right at the top it says Revelation of Islam and Prophetic Mission 610 to 632 AD. Okay? From the name of the Prophet there is a big thick line that goes down like this, directly under the Prophet. And it says Sunnis, approximately 90% of Muslims. With a little asterisk there, few bullets to say the 4 schools of law, Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki, Shafi, and then a little note to say extinct schools, in brackets, Zahiris, etc. That's all. So a nice big thick line, 90% of Muslims are Sunnis, and they're just divided into 4 sects that are not really a big deal, and the rest are all extinct, right? Just like that. Then the Shias, big diversion, totally away. You move away from orthodoxy and into heterodoxy. And then you have multiple lines. This looks like an artery, this looks like veins, right? All like cut into little pieces. And every sect, even the ones you've never heard of, are listed there. Old Shaykhis, new Shaykhis, Alawis, Ali Ilahis, Nizari Ismailis, Sulaimanis, Dawoodis, 12er Shias, Fatimid Ismailis, Nusayris, Seveners, Qaisaniya, this and that, and then there's all these little breaks, and it keeps splintering. Now, if you are a revert Muslim and you look at this, what is the impression you get? Why are the extinct groups who claim to be Shias all being listed with a branch of their own? And why is this division so much away under the name of Rasulullah? The bias and the obvious implication is that the Sunnis are orthodoxy, and you are a heretic group. You broke away. So that word Rafidi, those who broke away, is being graphically shown to you, how you break away from Islam, from Rasulullah, into these splinter groups. That's why I call this the biased encyclopedia of Islam. You see, if the author had called it the Salafi encyclopedia of Islam, or the Sunni encyclopedia of Islam, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But to call it the encyclopedia of Islam, this needs to be revised and called with changes, and then it can be called the unbiased encyclopedia of Islam. And I began wondering what would drive a scholar who has graduated from Columbia University to be so biased. But then his profile reveals that. He says it's a practicing Muslim, and he has done some work in Saudi Arabia for the Hajj Research Center, King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah. That tells me everything. Okay? So history has biases. And people, now your children will go to university and study Islamic history, they will use this as a reference for their research. You see? And the bias is very, very subtle. So this idea that the majority is wrong, is right, is not really the right way for somebody who is truly courageous enough to say, I want to know the truth. Okay? The question that we want to present then to this revert Muslim or to any sincere Muslim who wants to understand whether Islam is whether the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt is orthodoxy or it is heterodoxy, if it's really a heretic group that broke away. I want you to ask yourself only one question, and the question is this: did the majority follow the path they followed because of religion or because of the government? Because the government was always, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, was always Sunni. We know that the rulers of the Umayyads and the Abbasids, some of them were cruel tyrants, oppressors, but let's face it that from a fiqh perspective, it was a Sunni government. I'm not trying to imply that the Sunnis promote injustice, but this is how it was in history. And if you read history, no one will deny the fact that the Shias were always marginalized, were always oppressed. The Imams were always kept under house arrest. They were taken away from Medina. They were poisoned. The Shias were killed in large numbers. History records that some of the houses in Baghdad, the Shia Sadat were buried alive into the walls. Instead of cement, the blood of the progeny of the Prophet was used. You may try to suppress this, but the blood of one who is oppressed will not keep quiet. It will gush again and again and speak for the truth. So it's a non-established fact that the Shias were always oppressed, right? So now let's just look at this from our experience as human beings in the world we live in today. Okay? We are neighbors with the United States. Look at the life of most individuals living in the United States post 9/11. They may know that the administration is unjust, that they are wrong in what they're doing in Afghanistan or wherever, but will the majority speak against the government or they won't? They will not. And they will not for two reasons. There will be one group that will not out of fear, because the administration has said to them, you are either with us or against us. Right? This is what Bush said. So now you are in fear. Right? How many of us have not committed anything wrong against the United States, but we will not even cross the border? Because when you go there, they'll fingerprint you, they'll, if they could, they'd put you on a photocopier and photocopy you as well. They'll take pictures, they'll keep you for hours before you can get across the border. Right? Therefore, people out of fear will keep away, because they don't want to be called in for interrogation and for questioning and this and that. Right? Ask the scholars who go to preach how many times they are harassed. You just had a scholar who came here for Arba'in. Ask him, here in Canada, he was at the airport for 4 hours. Right? So people will avoid opposing or doing anything that brings them in the eyes of the government. The other group that might speak out, what the government will typically do is they will try to portray them as if they are a heretical group, as if they are out of their mind. And they will try to present their ideas as conspiracy theories. Anybody who said 9/11 was not done by Muslims, it was pushed as a conspiracy theory, isn't it? This is conspiracy theory. So you are bunched along with those people who believe in UFOs, basically. That's the idea, right? Now this is very, very important from a history perspective, because from a historic perspective, the moment you label someone, you turn the whole nation and a large number of people, and they keep away from this person. This is what the Quraysh used against the Prophet, isn't it? They called him a madman, they called him a poet, and they called him a magician. Sahirun and Majnoon. What was the reason for calling him this? The idea for calling him was not just to get the pleasure of abusing someone, like you might just abuse somebody on the road. The idea was to create fear in people's hearts so that they don't listen to what he is saying. Because people will listen to a label. You will be surprised, right? Many of you, for example, who are immigrants, who have come from India, Pakistan, Iran, or East Africa, you come from a background where the belief in devils and jinn and all is very strong. And it's very subtle in your psyche, even though you don't realize that, right? Now, let us suppose you really like me and you love me and you respect me and all that, right? Suppose, right? Now, somebody comes to you and tells you, this brother Khalil, I got to tell you something about him. You know, he's got a jinn who really sometimes, you know, when he's alone, he says some of the darnest things. I would advise never be alone with him. He's, you know, like, I've really seen some surprising things about, and then he just goes away. Now he's planted a seed in your mind. I guarantee you, if I call you the next day and say, come home for tea, you will not come alone. True? True. Right? Because that fear has been put in your mind. Now the moment you take a group of Muslims and you say, Rafidi, what does Rafidi mean? Those who broke away, the rejectors, the heretics. Right? Look at the United States. Listen to the media, because the media is controlled by somebody. He who pays the piper plays the tune, right? When there is a small group fighting the government, and the Western powers and their allies want to favor that small group, they will call them freedom fighters, they will call them activists, they will call them the resistance movement, right? When they're against them, right? When that small group is fighting and they're opposed to them, then they'll call them insurgents, then they'll call them rebels, right? This is subliminal brainwashing into your minds. By Allah, I tell you, when I say Wahhabi as followers of Ibn Abdul Wahhab. I don't say it in a manner of derogatory. And if people would understand what I mean when I say Salafi, I would say Salafi. Because my policy is this, that if you really are sincere and you want to reach out to people, don't start with a bias. Present things fairly and let people judge for themselves. But that's not a derogatory term. You're simply saying followers of someone. But to call somebody Rafidi, especially in this day and age, you see, some of the early scholars did refer to some Shia groups as Rafidi. But, and again, in being truly sincere, we have to accept and admit that within the Shias, there have been groups who have held extreme views that were wrong. We cannot deny that, right? These wrong views are called ghulu. And the Imams have spoken about them as ghullat, people who, for example, would believe that an Imam is an incarnation of God and would worship, right? They worship not only Imam Ali, they worship Imam Jaffer as-Sadiq alayhi salam as well, right? So these sort of groups existed. And there were early scholars who condemned them and referred to them as Rafidis. But in this day and age, to refer to the 12er Shias, the Shia Ithna Ashari as Rafidi, is simply political positioning. It is simply to turn people away so that you don't listen to them. It's like this chart. It's showing you they are a branch. They broke away. They are not with the majority. Okay? So this is something that we have an issue with. Now, you can imagine that if in a state or country that claims to be a democracy and have freedom of speech, like the United States, people will not speak out against the government, either out of fear of just being treated as a heretic or out of fear of being questioned. Can you imagine people speaking out in the Middle East today or in the past? Right? In this day and age, 2010, if you lived in the Middle East, those of you who live there, you know how tyrannical some of those governments can be. You will not dare speak out against the government because you will disappear so fast into a dungeon and you will be tortured. Right? Nobody in Syria, in Bahrain, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia will dare open their mouths against the government. This is now. Can you imagine 1400 years ago, anybody speaking out against the Banu Umayyah or Banu Abbas? Right? So you had to, in the days of Hajjaj, this is recorded in books, people preferred to be called an infidel and to become kafir than to be a Shia. It was so dangerous to be a Shia in those days. The moment, if somebody wanted to put you in trouble, even if you were not a Shia, they just accused you of being a Shia and you would disappear in the days of Hajjaj. Okay? So, when you say, how could the majority be wrong? You must ask yourself this question. Did the majority become majority for political reasons, because the government was majority, or because of Aqidah, because of Islam, because of the theological understanding of Imamah, because of the understanding of Sharia, because the fiqh and the teachings of Abu Hanifa was greater than the teachings of Imam Jaffer as-Sadiq alayhi salam, for example? Was that the reason why the majority followed this? Or was there political reasons for that? And even this argument that there are only 4 madhabs in Islam, again, I invite all of you to research this. You will see, study the history of the formation of these different sects from a fiqh perspective, these madahib, the 4 madhabs. You will see for yourself that when they first began forming, they were not 4. They were growing in numbers. There was 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, Hasan al-Basri and others. Each one of them had their own school of fiqh. And they were just growing in number. The government was afraid that if this is allowed, every Muslim will follow his own imam and have his own fiqh. So they put a stop to this and said, as of now, we officially recognize only these 4 schools. You have to be a Shafi, a Maliki, a Hanafi, or a Hanbali. Anyone else is a heretic. We don't recognize any other madhab. So the government institutionalized these 4 firqas. I believe even the imams, these 4 imams, Shafi, Hanbali, Maliki, Hanafi, who maybe the founders of these, they themselves did not foresee this formation. But there is no proof from Quran or Hadith to say that there are only 4 schools of fiqh in Islam. So where do you get this argument that if you pray Salatul Jamaat before a Shia imam, your salat is batil? Your salat is only valid if you pray behind an imam who is a Shafi, Maliki, Hanafi, Hanbali. Yet the imam doesn't have to be adil. He just has to be following one of these 4 schools. These schools formed after the time of Imam Jaffer as-Sadiq alayhi salam. That means the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, the Taba Tabi'een. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It means all those Muslims from the time of the Prophet's demise until the time that these 4 schools were formed, all their salat is batil. Because whose madhab were they following? Okay? So you have to really study history in its context and understand how things came to be the way they came to be. I'm not asking anyone to convert and become a Shia. I'm not asking to brainwash anyone. I am saying just be fair and accept. We don't even grow in strength if you accept us as a 5th madhab, to be honest. When we ask to be recognized as a 5th madhab, and the Grand Mufti, the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, did do that before Saudi Arabia became the voice of the Sunni Muslims, when the relations between the Shias and Sunnis were very, very warm and cordial, and we would get together on occasions, we would celebrate Miladun Nabi together. I myself remember the days in East Africa, in people who are from East Africa, from places like Mombasa and so on. You will remember that our Sunni brothers would hug us and talk of Sayyidina Ali, Sayyidina Hassan, Sayyidina Hussein. There was no this issue of celebrating the birth of the Prophet as bid'ah. And this rift came about after the oil started flowing and Saudi Arabia became a kingdom, right? So I'm asking you to only understand the issue. And if you embrace and accept the Ahlul Bayt school of thought as a madhab, it is for the good of the ummah. But to be blunt, we don't really care. It's not going to make us stronger. We don't look for validation. We've always been on our own. Another 1400 years will not make a difference to us, right? So this is something that we really need to think about and understand. Somebody once argued and said, the Shias are not a madhab. Why? Because Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi and Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they wrote a book on their fiqh. But Imam Jaffer Sadiq did not write a book. Therefore it can't be a madhab. So the understanding of the madhab is right from the beginning wrong. To us, it is not, because what they wrote is their risala, their fatawa, the kind of things that Ayatollah Sistani writes. Imam Jafar Sadiq is not a mujtahid. He is a successor to the knowledge of the Prophet. His hadith becomes the source through which someone else writes a book on fiqh. This is our understanding. He is the teacher of Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa himself, whose name was Nu'man, لَوْلَا السَّنَتَانِ لَهَلَكَ النُّعْمَانِ. If it was not for the 2 years I studied with Jafar as-Sadiq, I would have perished. So this lahalaka goes way all the way up to Imam Ali. It has a history. So this idea of majority history bias really needs to be understood. There is another point that is mentioned about the Shias that I would like to also bring to your attention. A lot of the individuals who oppose the Shias and their teachings and beliefs, they blame the Safavi dynasty. The Safavids had ruled Iran for a long time, and it is believed that when they came to power, the days of Shah Abbas, that is how the whole of Iran became Shia. And in particular, Saudi Arabia likes to convince the Muslims that there are really minimal number of Shias in the world. All the Shias are Iran. And they want people to be convinced that Shia equals Iranian. So only Iranians are Shia. In other words, it's a cultural religion for the Iranians. That's the idea that they try to propagate. And then they add to that, that because the Safavids ruled Iran, it is the influence of the Safavids that made the Shias the way they are. I'm not disputing the fact that when a particular group of people rule a country for a period of time, they will bring in ideas and culture into that society that will be different from Islam. We know that. You go to Mashhad today, in the Haram of Imam Rida alayhi salam, you will see up on one of the minarets, they have a certain tradition they call Naqqare Khane. You must have seen where they beat drums before sunset. As when the sun is setting, they stand and they beat drums. This was from the days of Shah Abbas. It's not that we don't know that this doesn't come from Islam. This is a cultural tradition. And culture is not bad if it doesn't oppose Islam. But we understand the difference. The question I have is this, that if one dynasty rules one country, you are willing to believe that they changed the thinking and the ideology of the entire nation. Why are you not willing to believe that the whole duration that the Umayyads ruled, they did not affect the teachings and ideas of those Muslims? And they ruled over the whole Middle East. Or that the Abbasides, or that the Ottoman Empire, or that the Seljuks and the Buyids and all those different dynasties. The Shia dynasties are very few. There is the Fatimid dynasty that ruled in Egypt, from which you have the Ismailis, for example. Right? That was only Egypt. But for the most part of the Muslim lands, there were groups that ruled that were predominantly following a Sunni madhab. What was their influence on those people has to be studied scholarly and historically and analyzed. As for example, the ahadith I quoted yesterday that were forged in the name of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. That he said that if you are ruled by oppressors who usurp your property, keep quiet, listen and obey. Doing ita'ah of the kings of Banu Umayyah is wajib, even if they oppress you, even if they're unjust to you. These sort of hadith, you must at least be open to the idea that they were introduced by those empires and dynasties who ruled over the Muslims to influence them and to preserve their power. You cannot ignore this if you are really a sincere seeker of the truth. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are two issues I want to discuss still and then come to a conclusion. One is historically, how do we prove the right of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, and the other is what is the way forward now? This issue of imamat and khilafat for Muslims, what next? Okay, so that we really tie all loose ends to this subject. And as far as the right of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam goes, I want to be very quick because of the interest of time, and as well because I know most of you are aware of this. I just have to mention things as hints and you will pick them up inshallah, and then those who don't, they can always research these on the internet. I mentioned earlier in the day today that when Muslims try to guess who the Prophet may have wanted to be his successor, they suggest certain things that we deem as simply clutching at straws. We don't think as them as being strong arguments. As for example, when Muslims say that the Prophet said, if there had been a Prophet after me, it would have been Umar. We say, well, if this was an authentic hadith, how come nobody thought about it, including Umar himself at Saqifa? Right? Or for example, the argument that the last 2 or 3 days of the Prophet's lives, it was Abu Bakr who led the prayers, therefore he is rightfully hinted to be the Caliph. And we said that he was supposed to be in the army of Usama. Right? Plus, this was never brought up at Saqifa. Plus the fact that Osama himself was the leader of the army. So if you go by simply who was in charge in the last days of the Prophet, he should have had a greater right to the Khilafat. So these are really not strong arguments. You keep all these arguments on one side, just trying to guess what the Prophet intended. Right? You now look at what is in favor of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, and you see the overwhelming evidence of this. First and foremost is the whole da'wat dhul ashira. The first time when Allah says to the messenger, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, to his immediate family. There it is very, very clear that the Prophet asks, who will support me? He will be my brother, my successor, my vizier. And it was only Imam Ali who stood up. And the books of history, you will remember many years ago when I recited on the month of Ramadan, on the nights of the Shahadat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I discussed the injustices that were done to him in history, and I mentioned sources where they narrate this incident of Da'watul Ashira, but instead of saying the Prophet said, you will be my brother and my successor, he says, and the Prophet said, wakada, wakada, etc., etc. You will be my brother, etc., etc., not my successor, my vizier. Why? To hide this fact that he was appointed right from the days of Makkah. Then you see the night of Hijrah, that the Prophet asks Imam Ali to sleep in his place because he has to go forth for Hijrah. You see, we do not deny the contributions of the Sahaba. People say that the Shias curse the Sahaba. By Allah, we don't. We don't curse them in the sense that you think we curse them. We are more readily happy to send blessings on the Sahaba who sacrificed selflessly and sincerely for Islam. The difference between us and the rest of the Muslims is, the Muslims say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa sahbihi ajma'een. Oh Allah, send your blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad and his companions, all of them. We say, what is the definition of Sahaba? They say, anyone who saw the Prophet in his lifetime is a Sahaba. Then I mentioned to you this earlier in the afternoon, that where did all the hypocrites go? Anyone who saw the Prophet, even the hypocrites saw the Prophet. You're bundling them all as Sahaba. We say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa sahbihim muntajabin wa ashabihim muntajabin. The difference between muntajabin and ajma'in is muntajabin are those who are elect, those who are selected. Now we don't say it all the time in our salawat because according to Sunni ahadith, when the Prophet was asked, how do we send blessings on you? He said, say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli wa ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Or that he added, kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ali Ibrahim. And that is why even the Sunni Muslims, when they say their salat, they don't say wa ashabi ajma'in. They stop. They say wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ali Ibrahim. The ironic part is that when they mention the Prophet, they only say, Allahumma salli alayhi wa sallam. They don't mention the al. Even in the hadith where they say, the Prophet said, send blessings on me and my al, they said the Prophet, peace be on him, said, do not say blessings on me only, say blessings on me and my al. Right? So we are simply following what the Prophet taught. Now, we are not downplaying the importance and the contributions of the Sahaba. But what we are trying to say is this. There is a difference between what the Sahaba contributed and what the Ahlul Bayt contributed. One very, very, very big difference. What is the difference? That difference will tell you that the Ahlul Bayt were chosen by Allah. What is the difference? The difference is this, that the contributions of the Sahaba, if you remove them from the historic context, Islam is not in danger or compromised. But the contributions of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, if you remove them from history, then Islam collapses. Understand this. This will tell you that the Ahlul Bayt are selected. Very simple example. The night of Hijrah, you have Imam Ali, you have Abu Bakr. Imam Ali sleeps in place of the Prophet. Abu Bakr goes with the Prophet, is in the cave with him, migrates to Medina. How he came to meet the Prophet, all that is a different story. Let's just take these two examples. Even if you see the contribution of Abu Bakr there as being something noble and praiseworthy, if he hadn't gone with the Prophet, it wouldn't have changed the course of history or Islam. But if Imam Ali would not have slept in that place of the Prophet, Islam would have changed. So his contribution was necessary. If you look at the battle of Khandaq, Khaybar, when we say they won because of Imam Ali, they say, well, Allah gave Muslims victory. Allah gave Muslims victory, but Allah doesn't come down himself to fight. He does it through someone. The person he's doing it through, look, who is this person? How important he is. In the battle of Khandaq, the Muslims sat, history says, they sat as if there was a bird on their head when Amr ibn Abd Wud said, who will fight me? Only Ali stood up. Now if Ali would not have stood up at that time, Islam would have perished. That is why the Prophet said, the complete Iman has gone to fight complete kufr. Why? Because now the whole Iman rested on Ali. If he would have not gone, it would have collapsed. The battle of Khaybar, the others went and came back. They couldn't defeat. Ali went and conquered it. So his contribution shows that he is critical to the history of Islam. Bilal gave great sacrifices. Bilal took a stone on his chest and refused to say that Allah has any partners. He said, Wahid, Wahid, Allah is Ahad, Ahad, Allah is only one. Our salams to Bilal, great Sahaba of Rasulullah. We're not downplaying it. Ammar, right, and Sumayyah, the parents, Yasir and Sumayyah, the parents of Ammar, the first shuhada of Islam. Their legs were tied on either side with horses and pulled, and they were ripped apart. Our salams to them, great Sahaba of the Prophet. But if they had not been tortured or been tortured, it doesn't change Islam. But if Hussein had not given his blood in Karbala, you would not be a Muslim today. So when you talk of the sacrifices of Ahlul Bayt, never forget this difference, whether you are a Shia or a Sunni, that these are individuals chosen by God, descendants of Ibrahim and Ismail through the Prophet, from the time of Adam. Inna Allah astafa Adam wa Nuhan wa ala Ibrahim wa ala Imran ala al-alamin. There is a lineage and a progeny that Allah has chosen and kept pure for guidance to mankind ila yawmil qiyamah. And this should not be compared with the sacrifices of the other Sahaba. So Ali's contribution are critical to the survival of Islam. You remove him from history, there is no Islam left. Then you see that when the Prophet goes to Medina, he leaves Imam Ali not only in his place to sleep, he leaves him in trust with all the things that were supposed to be returned to the people, because they used to call him As-Sadiq and Al-Amin, so they had given him money and things to keep. Ali had to return these possessions and trusts to the people in Mecca, right? Now supposing he wouldn't have done that, what would history record? History would have recorded that Muhammad fled to Medina and he took away people's property and usurped it. So that shows that again, the Prophet meant, who do you entrust with? Your heir, your successor. And that again tells us who the Prophet sees as his successor. Then the Prophet comes to Medina, he does not enter it until Imam Ali meets him at Quba. From there they enter to Mecca. Then when he comes into Medina, he assigns everybody a brother, the Muhajir and the Ansar. They are paired as brothers. The only one who is not paired is Imam Ali. When he asks the Prophet said, you are my brother. Fi dunya wal akhirah. Doesn't this tell you that this is the man the Prophet wants as his successor? I mean, you're looking for, you're struggling here and there. It's like, the man who talked about Salman. Somebody said that Salman al-Farisi or Salman al-Muhammadi did not get his Islam from his understanding of Tawheed from Islam. He says, it's like a man holding a pitcher with water, standing next to a flowing river, and you're arguing this water is not from the river. It's from another river from another country. Like, the writing is on the wall. The battles, I have talked about them. These clearly show the successor to the Prophet. The Prophet is told to close all the doors of all the people's houses that were attached to the mosque in Medina. وَسَدَّ الْأَبْوَابَ إِلَّا بَابَهُ. All the doors were shut except the door of Ali. Ali and the Prophet are the only people whose houses have doors that walk into Masjid al-Nabawi. Even the Prophet's uncle, the Sunnis have narrations to say that he complained to the Prophet, I'm your uncle and you are shutting my door, but you're not shutting the door of Ali. And the Prophet said, it is not my doing, Allah has commanded me. So again you're seeing these so many. Read Dua Nudba. Dua Nudba, there's all these fadail that shows you the excellencies of Ali. Mubahala, all these companions are available. The Prophet takes only Ali. Right? The incident of Kisa, the Tathir, ayat of Tathir, again you see there is only Ali. Surah At-Tawbah, now the Prophet is trying to show the Muslims, what if I wanted to do things differently? Even then Allah does not allow me. Read history. When Surah At-Tawbah was revealed, the Prophet was told to deliver these verses to the polytheists in Mecca. Somebody must go and read these verses to the Quraysh in Mecca. The Prophet gave these verses to Abu Bakr and said, go to Mecca and read these on my behalf to them. This is history. He went. When he reached halfway, the Prophet sent Imam Ali behind him. He reached halfway, Imam Ali caught up with him and said to him, O Abu Bakr, the Prophet has said, I must take the surah from you and I should be the one to read it to the Quraysh. And he said, if you wish, you can come with me, or if you wish, you can go back. History records he was offended. He went back to Medina. These are the words of Abu Bakr to the Prophet in history. Ya Rasulullah, if you didn't want me to do this, why did you humiliate me? Why send me and then pull me back? The answer of the Prophet is, it was not me who pulled you back. Allah revealed to me through Jibreel that, O Prophet, either you go and do it yourself or send Ali, but no one else. Now what more proof do you want? That who does Allah want as the successor of the Prophet? Tabuk, when the hypocrites were very strong in Medina and the Prophet had to go for an expedition and there was a fear there will be a coup in Medina, for the first time the Prophet goes to Tabuk, he leaves Imam Ali behind. The hypocrites start saying, the Prophet doesn't like Ali, that's why he left him. Ali goes out to meet the Prophet to make this point. It is at this point that the Prophet utters the hadith that is known as hadith of manzila. What is the hadith of manzila? Ya Ali, anta minni bi manzilati Haruna min Musa, illa annahu la nabiyya ba'di. Now what proof do you want? The Prophet is saying, O Ali, you are to me like Harun was to Musa. Harun was the successor of Musa, except that there is no prophet after me. So he is saying he is my successor, except that he is not a prophet. Shia and Sunni have recorded hadith al-manzila. Hadithatu safina, mathalu ahl bayti ka mathali safinatun nu. My ahl al-bayt is like the ark of Nu. Whoever boards it will be saved. Whoever does not will drown. Shia and Sunni, authentic hadith. What proof do you want? See, I don't understand this. Hadith of Thaqalain. I leave behind two weighty things. إِنِ تَارِكُمْ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَعِطْرَةِ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ. The Sunni scholars have said that the second version that says, I leave the Quran and my Sunnah, is a weak and unreliable hadith. The Sunni muhaddithun are saying this. They are saying the authentic hadith is that I leave behind my Quran, I leave behind the Quran and my Ahlul Bayt. Now my question is, how have you followed the Ahlul Bayt? Quran, we understand, you read it, you memorize it, you do tafsir of it. How have you followed the Ahlul Bayt? If it was sufficient to be guided with one, the Prophet should have said, I leave behind the Quran. But he says, he adds, وَلَنْ يَتَفَرَّقَ حَتَّى يَرُدَّ عَلَيْهِ عَلَى الْحَوْضِ. They will not separate until they return to me at the Hawd, Kawthar. That means they are inseparable. Right? So how do you follow them? We love the Ahlul Bayt. Loving the Ahlul Bayt is not following them. If Imam Jaffer as-Sadiq is telling you, pray like this, do wudu like this, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He is telling you to do and practice religion like this, and you are doing it differently, then how have you followed the Ahlul Bayt? Then there is Ghadir Khum. Ghadir Khum is a long, long story, obviously. But I just ask some questions that the ayat that all Muslims say was revealed at Ghadir. Ya ayyuhar Rasul, balligh ma unzila ilayk. Reveal, deliver the message we have given you. And if you do not say what we have revealed to you, then it is as if فَمَا بَلَّغْتَ رِسَالَةَ. You have not delivered anything. Now what did the Prophet say at Ghadir? He said, pray, fast, go for Hajj. And he said, مَنْ كُنْتُ مَوْلَهُ عَلِيٌّ مَوْلَهُ. Now, my question is this. What was so important that without it religion would not be complete? That the Prophet would say, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ. This day have I completed religion for you. وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي. And I've completed on you my favors. وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. Now I am pleased with Islam. Not a heretic religion or heterodoxy. Islam, now I am pleased with it as religion for you. What was missing in religion that had to be completed? Was Salat missing? Was Saum missing? Was Hajj and Zakat missing? Was the fact that Ali was not people's friend missing? And that had to be done before Allah would say, now religion is complete and I am pleased with you. What happened at Ghadir that the Muslims had to congratulate Ali and say, Bakhin, Bakhin laka yabna Abi Talib? Were they congratulating him that now you have become our friend, before that you were not our friend? So these are things that we need to think. And then the Prophet is told, when you deliver this message, do not fear. Wallahu ya'asimuka minan nas. What will Allah protect you from? He'll protect you from people if you tell them that Salat is wajib. He'll protect you if you tell them Zakat is wajib. So this issue of Ghadir, of course, and then go read the 70th surah of Quran, Surah Al-Ma'arij. Sa'ala sa'ilun bi'adhabin waqi. The man who came to the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, you told us to pray, we prayed. You told us to fast, we fasted. You told us to go for Hajj, we go for Hajj. Now you appoint your son-in-law as your successor. These are his words. Muslims' history. Is this from you or from Allah? Now if people had not understood Man kuntu mawlahu as successorship, he would not be saying this. And Rasulullah said, by Allah, it is from Allah. He raised his hands and said, oh Allah, he's cursing his own self. He is so angry. If this is really from you, then punish me. Immediately a stone falls. Like those ababil that destroyed the Kaaba, they came to destroy the elephants. A stone falls and hits him on the head and kills him instantly. Muslim historians, and this is the tafsir of the first verse of chapter 70. So what is this? And people say, why did the Prophet wait until he was dying to issue a will and say who should be his successor? The issue is that it's very, very clear. Okay, there is no evidence that Imam Ali ever asked anybody a religious question. Therefore, his knowledge was complete and total. He was the most knowledgeable person. And there are many, many other fada'il. The Prophet giving his only daughter to this man tells you something. The daughter who is so precious to him. Right? He gives him only to this man. And history records that others asked for the hand of Fatima. Abu Bakr asked the Prophet to marry Fatima. This is in history. And a very good book I would recommend to you by Shaheed Baqir al-Sadr is called Fadak fi Tarikh. And it is in English as well. Fadak in history. Fadak fi Tarikh, Fadak in history. Shaheed Baqir al-Sadr does a very academic treatment to the subject of Saqifa and Fadak. And he presents it in a very unbiased manner, but he analyzes it from a human psychology perspective to explain what was the human reaction when the Prophet denied his daughter to individuals. The jealousies, the anger, the hatred of certain wives of the Prophet to Fatima. There was a psychological, human, expected reaction to all these events that showed itself up at the Prophet's demise. Okay, so there's a lot of such material that you can go and read. Now, I have gone way over time and I still wanted to discuss the issue of Khilafat. Some of the brothers told me today don't look at the clock, but I don't know if this is true for all of you. With your permission, I need another 5-10 minutes if you're okay with that. I want to talk about this issue finally now, that what stops Muslims today from, number one, having an imam and a khalifa and coming under the banner of one imam. And Muslims today have a very negative image in the world. Okay? There is a game that people play where I say a word and then you finish the word, right? So for example, if I was to say foot, you would say ball. If I would say cat, you would say dog. And when they televise this on the show and ask people, when you tell somebody fundamentalist, he says Muslim. When you say terrorist, he says Islam. This is the image of Muslims today. Let's face it, right? What is it that is stopping Muslims from shedding this image? What is stopping Muslims, in my opinion, this is my understanding, and I stand to be corrected, is the lack of adala. The fact that justice is not a requirement in leadership in Muslims. It is this reason that you see countries that call themselves Islamic, like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia and other places, even when they see injustices committed, they quote those hadith of the Prophet to say that the Prophet said, even if an unjust ruler rules over you, keep quiet. Unless Muslims take the first step and say these traditions are forged and are untrue, they will not be able to move from this. Look at the successes of the Shias versus the Sunnis, and it is not to create a rift, but to just show you the importance of adala. Right? I showed you in this book, it says 90% are Shias. There are other places in the book, it says 90% are Sunnis. It says 97% are Sunnis. 3% are the rest, from which a part are the Shia Ithna Ashari. Okay? Now you go with those numbers and then look at the successes of the 3% over the 97%. We don't believe we are 3%. We are much more than that. But I'm not here to argue on that basis. Take, for example, the issue of Hezbollah and Hamas today. Look at the successes between the two. How many years Palestine has been fighting, right? Look at the successes. What is the difference between the two? The difference is that Hezbollah is patterned after Karbala. Karbala's message is this: never oppress somebody who is innocent. But when someone oppresses you, never keep quiet. And this is the principle on which Hezbollah is founded. And that's why you can see the success. 1967, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, 3 countries got together and attacked Israel from all sides. In 6 days, they were all defeated. With a country the size of, like chutney, we say, like small. But they were all defeated. 2004, right? Hezbollah, just a few bunch of guerrilla. We have read in the news ourselves that bombs were being flown from the United States to Israel to fight the Hezbollah. Look at their success. They chased them away and took their land back. Because of which today many Muslims in places like Syria are converting to the madhab of Shia and Ahlul Bayt. Why? Because they are saying that those that we looked up as leaders to us, like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Pakistan, they have kept quiet and sided with these Western allies who are oppressing Muslims. But these people, and because of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, they are standing up now and acknowledging that leadership must have adala. There is a famous scholar, John Esposito, many of you know of him, right? The Royal Islamic Studies Center has issued a book called The 500 Most Influential Muslims. You might have seen this. It's a 2009 publication, and they're promising to publish it every year, 500 Most Influential Muslims in the world. Now, keeping in mind that we are told the Shia Ithna Ashari are just less than 3%, right? When he lists the 500 most influential people, look at the top 10. Number 1, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. Number 2, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. Number 3, King of Morocco. Number 4, King of Jordan. Number 5, Prime Minister of Turkey. Number 6, Sultan of Oman. Number 7, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani. Then number 8, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar. Number 10 is Mufti of Egypt. Number 11 is the Mufti of Saudi Arabia. Now, do you see something here? From the less than 3%, there are 2 individuals. From the 97%, the top 8, 9 are all kings and prime ministers. There is no spiritual leader. The spiritual leaders are who? Sayyid Ali Khamenei, Ayatollah Sistani. This is not us writing this. Doesn't this tell you something? That there is something happening here. How could so few produce the most influential spiritual leaders? And this book is free on the internet. Just search John Esposito or Royal Islamic Studies Center, 500 most influential. On the cover of the book, they've got 3 prominent Shias: Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, and Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Right? So, on this principle as well, the United States attacked Afghanistan. They invaded Iraq when it was ruled by Saddam. They would not dare do it now, even though they say the country is at war. They are constantly talking about Iran, Iran, Iran. We want to bomb Iran. Iran must not have nuclear weapons. But no one dares to take the first step. Why? Because they are Shia. The Shias think on a different way altogether. They do not oppress, but they do not keep quiet to oppression. And the Shia is not an army of one country. You see, the Sunni Muslims, if the Mufti of Egypt says something, the Sunni Muslim sitting in Saudi Arabia doesn't really care. Or the one sitting in Canada doesn't care. Right? But the Shias pay attention to what their leaders say. If my mujtahid today says jihad is wajib, come, and he will only do it for a just cause, right? I will leave my job, I will leave my family, I will leave everything. On the next flight I'm out, and I'm sure all of you. So it is a global reserve army that stands for this principle, right? Our way of thinking is completely different. A couple of years back, when the Masumin youth had organized a program called Passion of the Savior, you will remember I talked about this as well, that there are 2 issues that give the Shias this strength. You see, from the Sunni world perspective, the voice used to be Egypt, and now the voice is Saudi Arabia. From the Shia perspective, it is Qum and Najaf. There are 2 things, and I just want to mention these and then come to an end, inshallah. There are 2 things that make the Shia so prominent and so powerful over others. One is the institution of marja'iyah, which unfortunately some amongst us are criticizing on petty things. Oh, this wakil is eating khums money, and let me tell you, when Imam Ali was the caliph, he had a governor who took money and ran away with it. Now, will you say that the government of Imam Ali was unjust? Okay, so this is not the way to think. The marjas on their own have no credibility and power, but their power comes from the fact that we say they are a na'ib of imam. In other words, marja'iyat is tied to the concept of imama, and imama is tied to the concept of adala. And it is from this that we gain our strength. This is what makes us so powerful. We must never let this be compromised. This is one thing. The other thing we have is Karbala with us. And this is what I had mentioned at that conference, at that program, Passion of the Savior. That from the time your child is this young, they come to the mosque, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. This child will never oppress someone. This child will never strap a bomb to himself and go and commit suicide. Right? Because we are the followers of those who have always been oppressed. You tell me your child comes to the mosque and hears that in the battle of Siffin, when Muawiyah had the Furat, he didn't give water to Imam Ali, but when Imam Ali got it, he opened it and said, take water. Or your child comes and hears every Muharram that Imam Hussein gave water to Hur, even though they didn't give water to him, to Hur's army. How will this child ever think of killing innocent civilians? So, defending justice and the oppressed is ingrained into our nature. Supporting that madhloom is very, very much within us. My proposal to the Muslim Ummah, as a conclusion, my proposal to the Muslim Ummah is this. The first step towards shedding this image of being fundamentalist or terrorist or being identified with Al-Qaeda and Taliban is to speak of justice in leadership. And leadership starts with Salatul Jama'ah. That is where you have an imam for a short period. When our Muslim brothers can stand up and say, one of the requirements for the person leading the prayer of Jama'at must be adala. He must be just in the eyes of society. This will then bring other issues to say that if someone is an imam for 5 minutes, he must be just. What about someone who is an imam perpetually over people? And unless Muslims do not say that those hadith that say the Prophet said follow an unjust imam are forged, and unless they don't accept that adala, justice must be a quality in an imam, nothing will change in the Muslim Ummah. This is a very, very important prerequisite to leadership. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight we have gathered to remember Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. This imam has great contributions to Islam. His role is very, very significant. Unfortunately, time will not permit me to discuss that, but it was important that we discuss this concept of imama. In fact, for people who say that the Shias developed the idea of imamat after the ghaibah, there is a beautiful hadith from Imam Rida that when Ma'mun was forcing him to become the Khalifa after him, or to take the Khilafat from him, so that he could then say that we are the ones who gave Khilafat to the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. Look at the reply of Imam Rida to Ma'mun. This is really the nail in the coffin that tells Ma'mun that Khilafat and Imamat is mansoos min Allah. It comes from Allah and it is not for you to give me. He says to Ma'mun, إن كانت هذه الخلافة لك والله جعلها لك فلا يجوز لك أن تخلع لباسا ألبسك الله بها. That, O Ma'mun, if this khilafat was given to you by Allah, then you are not permitted to remove the cloak and the robe that Allah has clothed you with. وَتَجْعَلَهُ لِغَيْرِ, and to give it to anyone else. وَإِنْ كَانَتِ الْخِلَافَةُ لَيْسَ لَكَ فَلَا يَجُوزَ لَكَ أَن تَجْعَلَ لِي مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ. And O Ma'mun, if this khilafat is not yours, then you have no right to give me what is not yours in the first place. What a beautiful argument. And when Ma'mun realized that it was the presence of this Imam that was stopping him from gaining popularity, and when he wanted the Imam to come to Mashhad, to Marv where he was, so that he could use him to win the Alawi. This Imam's imamat was 20 years. He was an Imam for 20 years after his father, al-Qadim alayhi salam, of which 17 years he was in Medina. The last 3 years he was in Mashhad, in Marv. But even those 3 years, his impact is so significant that Sheikh Saduq has compiled 2 volumes on just the hadith of this Imam, Akhbar al-Rida. And he had debates with different people of different schools of thought and different backgrounds to talk of Tawheed and some very deep and profound theological ideas. When Ma'mun asked this Imam to leave and be brought to him in Marv, he sent a man called Raja bin Abi Dhahhak, and he said to him, to Raja, when you bring Ar-Rida, do not bring him through the cities where there are Shi'as because of his popularity. Do not bring him through Kufa. Bring him through Basra and then cross over to Ahwaz and go through the different cities of Iran, to the different cities of Faris, so that people may not know him and may not identify him. But yet you see the strength of his personality, that even when he's brought through this route, people from villages who heard the grandson of the Prophet is coming, the grandson of the Prophet is coming, they would run out to go and meet him. By the time he got to Nisabur, or Nishapur as it is called, 20,000 to 24,000 scholars, scribes, got there just to listen to his words, where he uttered the hadith of Dhahabiyya. And he said to them that I heard from my father, who heard from his father, all the way to Allah, through that golden chain, that whoever says La ilaha illallah, Allah says whoever says La ilaha illallah, enters my fort. And whoever enters my fort, amina min adabi, is saved from my punishment. And then the Imam moves forward and again establishes the principle of Imamah, that, O Muslims, you will not succeed without accepting us as your Imams. He again stops and addresses these 24,000 people and says, بِشُرُوطِهَا, with its conditions only. وَأَنَا مِن شُرُوطِهَا, and I am one of those conditions. You must accept me along with your saying La ilaha illallah before you are saved from the punishment of the hellfire. And then the Imam comes to Marv, and he stays for a period with Ma'mun. Day by day, Ma'mun sees that this Imam has a strength and a personality that cannot be calmed, that cannot be reduced. I have talked to you in the past of the incident of Eid. When the Imam went out for Eid, when he would say Allahu Akbar, the city of Marv would shake, the walls would shake and say Allahu Akbar. Sheikh Mufid has narrated this in detail in his Kitab al-Irshad. When Ma'mun finally saw that he had to now dispose of this Imam, he called the Imam to his court one day, and he prepared some poisoned grapes for this Imam. The Imam said to his companion Abu Salt al-Harawi, O Abu Salt, I am going to Ma'mun, but there is no good in this meeting. O Abu Salt, when I return, if you see my head covered with my abba, do not talk to me. If you see my head uncovered, then talk to me. Abu Salt stayed worried, waiting for the Imam. The Imam goes and meets Ma'mun. Ma'mun sits and holds some grapes in his hands that were not poisoned. He pretends to eat them to show the Imams that these are not poisoned. He says to the Imam, how beautiful and sweet these grapes are. The Imam tries to deflect that and says, perhaps the grapes in paradise are better. Ma'mun says, no, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, you must eat of these grapes. Imam says, I do not feel like eating them today. Ma'mun says, no, you must eat it. If you don't, I will think you suspect me of something. He forces the Imam to take some of this. When the Imam takes this, he stands up from his place, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He starts leaving and going back to his home. Ma'mun says to him, where are you going, Ibn Rasulullah? Imam says to him, I am going where you are sending me, or Ma'mun. He comes back to the house, his head is now covered. Abu Salt al-Harawi says the Imam goes into a chamber and begins doing tasbih. He is worried the Imam is all alone, he is gharib. There is no one besides the Imam while he is dying. Then he sees a young boy appearing into the room and saying, I am al-Jawad from Medina. I would say, Ya Imam al-Rida, there are many similarities between you and Hussein, except for one difference. Oh Imam Rida, when you left Medina, you went to the grave of Rasulullah and cried. Time and again you went back and forth and cried and said, I am leaving the grave of Rasulullah. When Hussein left Medina, he cried the same way. Or Imam al-Rida, when you left Medina, the women and the children thronged around you weeping because you are leaving. When Hussein left for the last time in Karbala, the women and the children gathered around Hussein and cried. But there was one difference between you and Hussein, oh Imam al-Rida. The difference is that when Imam Rida left Medina for Marv, he called his family together. He said, I will never have anyone besides me when I am dying. I will not, inni la arju ila iyali abadan. I will never return to Medina again. My dear friends and my family, recite a majlis for me while I am alive before I die. History records that Rida said, the people sat around him and cried for Imam Rida while he was alive. Imam Rida is that Gharib whose majlis was recited while he was alive. But the difference is that when Hussein was leaving and Zainab and Sakina and Ruqayya were crying, Hussein was saying, do not cry for me, do not cry for me. You still have to cry in the streets and alleys of Kufa and in the prisons of Sham. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماطم حسين.